One when humanity entered Skyrift Realm, most woke inside floating. Castles, sky towers, cloud farms, cannon barges, and armored platforms, but he woke in. A torn, falling balloon basket, already plummeting down, no tutorial room. And there was absolutely no calm, robotic voice to gently walk him through what was happening. 1 second he was asleep in his bed, the next howling wind screamed past. His ears and the floor under him was tilting like a boat in a flood. His stomach lifted into his throat from the drop, and he grabbed out blindly for the nearest object without even opening his eyes. His hand closed on a frayed rope. And thankfully the rope held, his single piece of luck during those terrifying first seconds. He opened his eyes to a sky that did not belong to Earth, above him. Clouds were stacked in massive layers like floors of a building, soft and white. Near the top turning gray, then deep bruised blue far below, flickering. With a strange light that was definitely not sunlight, castles hung in that high, white air. Real castles, the kind from old paintings, with stone walls and banners. And gardens, except these floated, held up by glowing rings of light under their foundations. Sky towers spun slow windmills, flat, heavy. Armored platforms bristled with cannons. There were even houses with wings. And docks where smaller vessels were tied like fishing boats in a harbor. All of it was above him. The air smelled wrong, too clean and too thin, scrubbed of every ordinary smell he knew, with a faint metallic edge underneath, like the taste on your tongue right before a storm breaks. His ears kept popping from the rapid change in pressure as his weak basket plummeted, freezing cold pressing hard against his skin with the steady weight of high altitude, the kind felt in your teeth. Every single part of his trembling body screamed the exact same thing his eyes already had. This was real, whatever this place was. It was no dream he could wake from. By simply deciding to, and the floor under him really was going to keep falling until it hit something. He was below all of it, dropping through a windy middle layer, where broken pieces of old structures drifted past in the air, and the only thing holding him up was a balloon that was clearly dying. The fabric canopy over his head was a ripped patchwork of faded cloth torn along 3 long seams, constantly leaking the precious warm air that was absolutely supposed to keep him up. The burner under canopy was just a dented metal cup coughing a weak, pathetic orange flame, sputtering and coughing again. Ropes holding the basket were heavily frayed, down to a few single, thin threads each. The basket itself was old, rotting wicker, soft end split, creaking every time the wind shoved it. He looked up at those castles, and for one foolish second, he waited for someone to notice him, to send a rope, to do something. Nobody did. They were specks, and he was a falling speck below them. Then a pane of pale blue light folded open in the air, right in front of his face, and a calm message printed itself across it: Skyrift Realm. Humanity has been relocated directly above the storm ocean. Every single survivor now owns one sky vessel. Uncontrolled descent into the deep storm means death. Sky market and survival panels are active now. Gather, craft, stay airborne. Our falling protagonist read it twice. While the basket dropped, there was no friendly tone to it and no encouragement. Just cold rules laid flat like terms on a ticket. Relocated. Storm ocean, death, the kind of heavy words a person does not dare argue with. A second panel. Another screen slid up next to the first, and he couldn't take his eyes off it. The screen displayed a low-altitude warning, 3 damaged seams, and a cracked burner. With barely 5 minutes of lift, the closing storm was a massive threat. He had spent his entire life being good at exactly one thing, and it certainly was not keeping cool in front of glowing magic screens. No, he fixed broken things. He did it for cash. He repaired tents, camping gear, kites, and umbrellas that flipped inside out. The heavy covers street vendors hung up and tore every single week. People always brought him their cheap, broken, falling apart junk to fix. With a needle, a roll of thread, and a small box of patches, he made things last. He was far from a legendary hero, a brave knight, or anyone special. Just a regular guy who didn't panic when things started ripping apart. That, as it turned out, was the only skill that mattered up here. Right then, a smaller third screen popped up with a soft, gentle chime. Starter pack granted: 1 flask, a dull knife, and some rope, along with a cracked hook and a basic needle and thread repair blueprint. He almost laughed. Somewhere, a lucky guy in a castle got a cannon blueprint. Or maybe a windmill, a farm, a defense turret, or a massive warehouse. The system was handing out floating fortresses like cheap party favors. Instead, he received a basic sewing recipe and a dull knife. He looked down at the dull blade sitting in the corner of his basket. Then he looked up at the torn canopy, bleeding warm air over his head. Instantly, this cosmic joke died. Can you even blame him? A sewing recipe for a balloon held together by shredded cloth. The system hadn't given him a weak gift, it gave him the perfect tool. It was the exact fix for his exact problem. He stopped looking up. Ignoring the sky was his first real choice in Skyrift Realm, and it saved his life. Staring at the wealthy vessels high in the sky would only make him a victim. But looking down at his basket, the ropes, and the burner changed everything. Now he was just a repairman with a job and a 5-minute clock. He got straight to work. The luxury basket was packed with useless decorations. It was clearly designed for some wealthy snob, not a survival scenario. Ornate wooden carvings were lashed to the rim alongside a heavy brass plate. There was even decorative chain and heavy tassels that did nothing but add weight. Every single one of those luxury items was dragging him toward the storm. He hacked them off with his dull knife, sawing frantically at the ropes. Tossing them over the side, he watched the brass plate vanish. The basket immediately lightened, and the creaking wicker frame finally quieted down. His remaining lift time on the screen suddenly ticked upward. It went from 5 minutes to 6. That extra minute felt like a godsend. But a single minute wouldn't save him. He had to patch the leaking canopy. He needed cloth, a needle, and something to punch stitches through heavy fabric. With a sewing recipe but no thread, his own jacket was the only option. Ripping the jacket off, the freezing, thin high-altitude air hit him instantly. He ignored the biting cold and began slicing the inner lining away. He shreds his jacket into long strips. He slices them thinner to resemble thread. Next, he unravels the cuff to get a real length of string, the outer shell. Of the jacket, that tough, water-resistant layer is saved completely whole. That is his patch material. His dull knife becomes his needle. He lacks a real needle. He relies on old tricks from fixing thick rubber umbrella seams. Back then, when a small needle failed, he used a heavier point. And some weight. Now, he drives the dull blade through the canopy fabric too. Prep each hole, he threads the jacket strip right behind it. Steady rhythm takes over. His hands learn the motion long before his head does. He feels the cloth resistance. He knows exactly how hard to push before the point breaks through, no slips. He cannot let the blade rip open a new Instead of sealing the old one, his hands remember it, even way up here. With the basket swaying, he feels grateful for every cheap, broken umbrella he had ever cursed at his workbench. Each one taught him this very skill. It is slow, grueling, awkward work with his arms overhead as the basket keeps swaying violently underneath. Twice, he nearly drops the knife into the dark void, but the worst here, that massive seam near the front where the air screams out, slowly comes together. He pulls the tough jacket shell across the rip. Like a tight bandage, stitching it down at the edges, knot after knot. His fingers burn from the cold and the friction of the strips. Finally, his recipe panel chimes as the first proper stitch line closes. Windcraft recipe complete, crafted, emergency canopy patch activated, 1 major. Canopy seam is sealed, lift restored, the whistling wind through that front tier cuts off all at once. The balloon canopy bellies out above him, filling properly. For the first time since he woke, and the basket steadies beneath his feet. The real floor finally finding solid ground, his status panel updates, lift time. Climbs past 10 minutes and keeps going. For once, the balloon is not falling. He stands there breathing hard, hands raw, his jacket completely gone. Knife still in his fist, letting himself feel the immense difference for exactly 3 seconds. Not falling, talk about a massive relief, but he still forces himself to look at the rest of his status. Simply not falling is not safe. And a repairman who stops after the first patch is a repairman who gets a. And he knows it. The canopy still has 2 other torn seams. Smaller but leaking slowly. The burner is still cracked, drinking precious fuel. He has no real food besides a single dry biscuit, no real water beyond half a flask, and no weapon worth speaking of. He is stabilized, but only like a man treading water in the middle of an ocean. He is not drowning this very second. That is all. The wind shifts. And suddenly, something tumbles into view off to his right, spinning out of gray clouds. End over end, it tumbles, a wooden box about the size of a foot. Locker one side hanging wide open, and ropes trailing from its corners. This is a broken supply crate, the kind the system scatters through the drift sky to be salvaged or lost. Inside, items glint, his salvage marker lights up automatically around it, a thin ring of light tagging the drifting crate as valuable salvage, drifting supply crate, useful contents detected. The system alerts him the item cannot be inventoried and requires manual retrieval. The crate floats 30 feet out, drifting slowly just below his basket. He has a cracked hook and some short rope, tying them together with his most reliable knot. Bracing his hip against the basket edge, he takes aim and throws, but misses. The hook sails wide, forcing him to haul the rope back hand over hand as the crate keeps drifting, cutting the distance between them down to 20 feet. Soon it is 15. The current pulls it closer, but also downward, and if it slips underneath his basket, it will be lost to the abyss. He coils the rope again, tracking the spin of the wooden box and waiting for its open side to face him before throwing again. This time, the hook bites deep into the frame and holds fast. He has it. He begins pulling slowly, keeping his tension perfectly steady, so it does not slip, dragging the floating box closer through the empty air. Right then, a massive iron-beaked gull decides it wants that box for itself. Swooping from above, he hears the beast before he can even see it, a metallic shriek like metal scraping on iron. He twists around, finding the creature already diving straight toward him. This thing looks nothing like any ordinary bird back home. It is the size of a massive dog with a huge wingspan. It's dark gray feathers tipped with rust-colored metal, but its beak is by far the worst part. It is long, hooked, and hard as steel, designed to pierce wood and shred human flesh. Luckily, the beast is not targeting him directly. It only wants the box. Both of them are after the food and materials inside, and the giant gull has absolutely no intention of sharing. He tracks its rapid movement as it lines up the dive, knowing his only real weapon right now is his observation. The predator does not circle to size him up like a smart animal would. It simply locks onto the target and commits its entire weight to the plunge. Wings tucked tightly, nose first. A creature that commits this blindly to a target cannot easily alter its path mid-flight. That single weakness is his only chance. If his theory holds, this is the entire fight. He has only 1 second. To act and panic is not an option, so he calculates his next move. Fighting that armored beak head-on with a dull knife is suicide, but he does not need a fair battle. He just needs to make the gull overcommit. He suddenly stops hauling the rope, letting the crate float entirely slack. The box drifts freely in the air, transforming into a completely defenseless target. And the hungry monster takes the bait. It behaves exactly like a wild beast, folding its wings and diving beak first, right into the open end of the crate to grab whatever food it can smell. The collision is absolutely brutal, causing the box to jolt. The gull rams its head and shoulders deep inside, thrashing and flapping wild wings to stabilize itself. For a brief second, the beast is completely trapped. Its head is stuck and its wings are wedged hard against the broken wood. Since the crate is hooked to his line, the gull is now tethered to him. Now comes the counterattack. He yanks the rope back with all his strength, pulling both the box and the struggling bird toward his platform as one heavy load. The beast panics and tries to pull free, but its wings are jammed tight inside, and the fraying box ropes have already tangled around its flailing leg. The gull shrieks, twisting in absolute agony, and half out of the box, dragged closer to him with every pull, until it could finally lock eyes. Now it wanted him instead of the bait, but it never got the chance to make that choice by the time it freed its head and turned its iron beak toward the basket. It was in arm's reach. Its most vulnerable spot lay completely exposed. The wing joint, where the heavy muscle of the wing met its body, was stretched wide while the bird strained against the tangled rope. He had a dull knife, but a blunt blade driven hard with a man's full weight behind it. Doesn't need to be sharp. He stabbed it through the wing joint and twisted hard. The monster let out a high, broken shriek, and its wing went limp and completely useless. The beast was still dangerous, still snapping, but it couldn't fly or pull away anymore, and once a creature cannot gain any distance, he can finally take his time. He pinned it against the crate with his knee, kept the rope tight with one hand, and finished the job. It wasn't clean and it wasn't pretty, and nobody would pretend it was, but it was over fast. And then it was over, and the dead bird hung limp against the box. He sat back in the basket with his chest heaving and his hands shaking, not from fear, but from the leftover rush of moving that fast, and he stared at what he had pulled out of the sky, starting with the crate. He dragged it all the way in and began sorting through it. It, folded inside, protected by the solid wood, was a piece of torn sailcloth. Tough and wide, far better patch material than anything cut from his own. Jacket, there was a water gourd, still half full, an absolute lifesaver with his. Flask running low, next was a single strip of dried meat, hard as a stick. But actual food, and caught in the broken boards, was a spare head off. Another hook which meant a reliable backup if he lost his own. The gull gave up. More than he ever expected, a repairman learns never to discard a broken thing. Until he has stripped it down for parts. A dead monster is no different, he worked. One long iron-edged feather loose from the intact wing. It was as stiff and sharp along its spine as a knife blade, buried deep inside the bird's chest, where he never would have thought to look if the salvage marker hadn't pulsed. Faintly over the carcass, there was also a small, hard nugget glowing a low ember. Read a monster core. Seriously, what kind of power was locked inside this thing? Marked it as valuable, and he had already learned to trust the system when it came to loot. He tossed the carcass overboard once he had stripped it, both to shed weight and because the smell of blood wasn't something he wanted drawing attention in a sky full of hungry, winged beasts. He bundled the sailcloth, the gourd, the meat, the feather, the core, and the bare hook head. The system's inventory accepted the smaller items with a soft chime, sliding them into storage to stop weighing his basket down. Inventory updated: torn sailcloth, water gourd, dried meat strip, iron beak, feather, monster core, and small hook head. Finally, he did what he'd been waiting to do. He pulled out the tough sailcloth, climbed under the canopy, and finished the repair job on the 2 remaining seams properly. The work went faster now that he had practice, and because his thread was a massive upgrade over that unraveled sleeve, he stitched both tiers closed, doubled the pat over so it wouldn't tear free, and secured the final knot just as the recipe panel chimes again. Windcraft complete. The emergency canopy patch seals tight, meaning his critical lift time is extended. The canopy swells hard and round above him, fully trapping all the warm air now. No whistling leaks remain. The basket rides steady. The status panel, which showed 5 minutes when he woke, now displays a much more livable number. It gives him room to breathe. Balloon status: altitude low. Minor balloon damage, canopy sealed, a cracked burner, stable lift. Weight within limits and the storm holding. He finally lets himself sit down in the bottom of the basket. He tears off a piece of the dried meat, chewing slowly to make it last, and takes one careful sip from the water gourd. No more, the bitter cold without his jacket has settled deep into his bones, but he is not falling. And not falling is enough to make him feel almost warm, far above him. The castle still hangs in the white air, throwing its light. Up there, people with cannons and stone walls are probably already deciding who will rule the sky. Let them. They started safe, which means they started soft. He started in a torn basket 5 minutes from death, meaning he has already done the hardest thing a person can do up here, surviving the first fall. With absolutely nothing, he thinks about the man who got the cannon blueprint. Whoever he is, sitting in stone walls with an unearned weapon and a vessel he did not fix. The first time something on that castle breaks, and something always breaks, he will stare helplessly, like looking at a flat tire waiting for someone else to handle it. The system spreads a soft trap under every easy start here, and the people who land in absolute comfort are the least prepared when that comfort fails. He landed in the exact opposite trap. Nothing about his start was comfortable, so nothing could lull him. He looks at the monster core glowing in his inventory, the iron feather sharp as a knife, and the recipe panel that taught him to fix something he had no business fixing. He starts to understand. The system did not hand him a weak life, it handed him a starting point and tools. Everything passed. That point is pure survival, just salvage, stitching, and the willingness to do the work while the items fall from the sky. He is in deep thought when the salvage marker pulses again, pointing directly below him. Deeper in the gray, the system tags a second drift. It is massive, not a single crate, but a cluster of objects spinning together, and the readout beside it holds more value than anything he has seen. Since waking, real materials wait down there, the kind that can buy him hours of lift instead of minutes, turning a patched balloon into something he can actually steer. A warning flashes under marker: high-value salvage, large drift cluster below. Hazard objects lie within a wind shear path. He knows enough to understand what that means. Safe air holds nothing, everything worth having in the Skyrift Realm sits one bad current from killing you. The Only ones who climb out of the low sky are those willing to. He decided to dive into the part that bit back, looking at the ridge castles one last time, high and safe and far away. Then he looked down at the windchar tightening. The rope on his hook getting ready to plunge. The smart move, stay put. He had a sealed canopy, and his basket was riding level for the first time since he woke, and a status panel that finally read something other than a countdown to his own death. Any sane person would have held that altitude. Rationed his dried meat, sipped the water gourd, and waited to see what the sky did next. Hold steady, survive the day. That was the careful play, and the careful play would have killed him slowly. Slow death is still death. Safe air held absolutely nothing. He had already learned that in his first hour up. There, the good cloth, the gourd, the iron feather, the glowing core, every single thing that had bought him another minute of life had come out of danger. Not out of calm. The high castles floated in the safest air in the whole realm, and the people inside them had everything handed to them at the start. But he was not them, and sitting still was never his style. Just watch what he does next. Below him, the system had tagged a drift cluster, worth more than anything he had touched yet, and it sat right inside a windchar, because of course it did. The realm put the good things where the killing was, so he tied himself in, running the short rope around his waist and lashing it to the strongest upright of the basket frame, the one corner post that did not flex when he leaned on it, and cinching it down until it bit. If the dive threw him, he wanted to come up short against the basket instead of falling free into the gray. Then he checked his cracked hook, retied the line to it, and coiled the slack where he could throw it one-handed, tucking his dull knife into his belt where he could reach it without looking. A man who has to hunt for tools mid-fall is a man who will never finish that descent. This massive windchar was actually pretty easy to see once he knew where to look. Below him, the drifting cloud bands ran smooth and parallel in one direction. Then, along an incredibly sharp line, they sheared off and ran the opposite way, faster, churning where the two flows met into a long, ragged seam of turbulence. Anything caught in that seam did not drift gently. They spun. He could see the cluster now, three pale shapes tumbling end over end inside. The churn flashing and vanishing as the clouds swallowed and spat them back. He studied the rhythm of it for as long as he dared, because his single advantage over the wind was patience. This chaotic churn was not random. It pulsed, surging hard for a few seconds before easing up for a shorter stretch, just like surf breaking on a beach. A small object riding the quiet stretch could cross the seam and escape on the far side before the next surge caught it, too slow, and the surge would catch him too early, and the leading edge would throw him back. He counted the pulses under his breath until he had their timing down in his body, the way he used to learn the give of fabric before putting a needle to it, and only then did he commit. To reach the salvage, he had to drop in absolute madness and come out the other side before the crossflow flung him somewhere he could not climb back from. He tilted the burner, though this was the part he was least sure of. The burner was cracked, and he simply did not trust it. But a balloon steers by lift. Lift is heat, and heat was something he could easily aim. By burning the flame hotter on one side and choking the other, he could steer the canopy. He guided it slowly in his chosen direction, angling toward the leading edge of the wind shear, letting the basket slide down and across into the first smooth air current that ran directly toward the chaotic churn. Then the wind seized him, the basket tilted, ropes groaned as gray mist rushed up to meet him. Then he hit the seam, and the world flipped sideways. A brutal crosswind slammed the basket the moment he crossed the threshold, tossing him hard against his safety rope and knocking the breath clean out of him. The ropes bit into his ribs, the canopy bucked, the rig spun wildly. Two competing winds fought for control. He was thrashed around like a toy in a shaking cup. Blinding gray mist streaked past in literally every single direction. He could only tell up from down by the intense squeeze of the rope at his waist. Through the violent chaos, his newly sewn patches surprisingly held incredibly strong. The canopy remained intact above his head when it logically should have shredded instantly. He had never been more thankful for his own meticulous needlework. Suddenly, the first chunk of salvage hurtled out of the turbulence before he could even gather his bearings. It was a waterlogged, dark slab of shattered wood, tumbling slowly through the air. The system marker barely highlighted it, but he instinctively threw his salvage hook anyway. Snagging it on his second attempt, he hauled the heavy piece in close. Inspecting it closely, he quickly understood why the system had barely flagged it. The wood was completely rotten through, far too soft to construct anything useful with. It seemed totally worthless, but his old habits as a seasoned repairman kicked in. The craftsman in him hated throwing away salvage before stripping it for parts. But his new reality of strict weight limits and a fuel-guzzling burner demanded caution. He knew he should discard it, but he paused. Junk can still have uses. Even if it was useless for building, an instinct told him to hold on. That waterlogged slab was incredibly heavy, far heavier than typical dry timber of its size. If nothing else, a solid, heavy object could always be weaponized in a pinch. He quickly lashed it tightly to the rim, keeping his hands completely free. Then he prepared for the next piece. This one looked much better. It drifted low to his left, revealing a mess of rope and a battered metal tin. It resembled a cheap, heavily dented cooking pot. He fired up the burner to dive after it, angling the basket deep into the violent wind currents. The whipping crosswinds almost ripped the salvage line from his grip, but he persisted. Pulling it in, the rope unraveled into incredibly long, strong, usable strands of fiber. This was a massive upgrade over the tiny starter ropes he had been hoarding. The damaged tin had a cracked rim, making it useless for cooking, but the interior was incredibly shiny, acting like a pristine mirror in the dim light. He caught a sharp reflection whenever he tilted it toward the cloud-filtered sky. He had absolutely no immediate need for a mirror, yet he kept it anyway. Let's be real, throwing away the only shiny object you own is a huge mistake. Back in his old workshop, he used to keep shelves packed with random curiosities. Spare parts with no obvious purpose, saved because the right situation always eventually arose. Eventually, some client would desperately need that exact oddity and that scavenger habit. Stuck with him even up here in the sky, soon a third salvage. It was the very chest the system wanted him to find, a squat, heavy container. Banded with thick iron, looking like a garbage bin a flying castle would bolt to its belly to drop waste, yet it had broken free, plunging into the violent winds with everything still sealed tight. The system marker glowed brightly around. It getting close meant diving straight into the absolute worst of the storming winds. Right where two massive currents tore at each other, and he almost lost his entire rig trying to reach it. The basket spun wildly, sending his stomach straight into his throat. Still, he secured the hook into the iron bands, dragging the heavy chest out of the vortex and pulling it close so he could pry. It opened with a dull blade. Wrapped inside an old rag was a thick, clear gel the color of pale honey, kept inside a sealed bladder that sloshed at his touch. Even through the fabric, he felt its intense stickiness. Sticky in a way that clung to his fingers and refused to let go easily, and a faint sweet smell drifted up, completely out of place in that thin, cold air. The item description read, salvage, cloud sap, high-value adhesive resin. He had no idea how much this single find would change things for him, but he recognized the words high value the moment the system showed them to him. He knew the feel of a true jackpot. This was strong sky-grade glue, exactly what every patch he had made so far had been crying out for, because thread alone cannot seal a seam against the wind. A bonded stitch holds 3 times longer. A castle had discarded this as garbage, dumping it down a waste chute. Without a single second thought. To him, however, it was worth far more than the heavy brass plate he had let drop during his very first hour of work. That single chest showed the truth of this sky world. Waste keeps the falling alive. He stored the sap into his inventory before the winds could knock it loose. For one foolish second, he actually let himself believe the hard part was behind him. But naturally, a terrifying wind jellyfish found him, rising silently from the abyss below. It came up out of the dense clouds, and he did not see it until it was already touching him, because it was nearly the same pale gray as the air. The beast was massive, a soft, transparent bell as large as his basket, trailing long, glowing tentacles that drifted lazily upward to surround him. Their slow movement made them seem almost gentle. A faint blue pulse was the only light visible in the dark. That agonizingly slow approach made it even worse. Because the creature did not strike with speed, it simply wrapped itself like water, clinging to a stone, draping icy tentacles over the edges of the basket and the canopy lines. Soon, he was trapped inside a cage of those glowing limbs. Before he realized he was caught, then a sudden, biting cold struck his body. The monster was draining his burner, sucking away the vital heat he needed. Wherever a glowing tentacle touched, the warm air vanished into those pulsing blue waves. causing the damaged burner to flicker and shrink rapidly as the heat escaped. The system interface flashed a critical warning directly in front of his eyes. Warning: burner output critical, altitude dropping fast, according to the system. The heavy basket began plunging downward, not a controlled descent, but a dead sink. Of a failing balloon losing its lift, below him the dark abyss opened up, leading straight into the freezing gray depths where those creatures had come from. He had maybe a minute left, maybe less, before the burner died entirely and took his lift. Down with it, that massive jellyfish was in no rush because it did not need to be. It was going to freeze him cold and let the howling storm take whatever was left. But panic was not an option. It never is. A slow-moving death gives a man. He had a basket loaded with heavy salvage and a mind that worked best when things were actively breaking. First came his dull knife, pulled with zero hesitation. But he did not slash wildly. Cutting the thickest parts of those heavy tentacles would accomplish absolutely nothing. With soft flesh, you cut right where the tension builds. You let the knot do the hard work for you. He tracked one massive limb to where it wrapped twice around the corner post and tightly cinched itself down. Right there under its own heavy weight, the blue flesh was stretched incredibly tight. He aimed right for that straining point and slammed his dull blade deep inside. The limbs snapped like a heavy rope under pressure, violently recoiling away from him. Where it ripped free, a thick clear liquid oozed out, and the glowing blue pulse in that segment went completely dark. It worked, but one limb was nothing. The creature still had a dozen limbs wrapped tight and cutting them one by one. It would take far longer than his failing burner had left. He needed a mass release. All at once, you do not negotiate with a faceless nightmare. You hurt the one part it cannot possibly ignore, the core, deep inside the soft translucent bell where the tentacles met the main body. A brilliant pulse of blue light throbbed slowly. That was the heart of the glow, where all the stolen warmth was pooling. But it lay buried deep inside clear flesh where his knife could never reach. Climbing in there with those stinging limbs would mean certain, painful death. But the core was pure light, and honestly, his next move was pure genius. He snatched his polished cooking tin off the floor, turning the inside outward. He caught a sliver of weak sunlight breaking through the heavy clouds and bent it into a blazing, focused beam. He aimed that blinding reflection straight at the pulsing core through the gelatinous bell. The moment the light struck, the glowing core flared and the giant creature convulsed in agony. Whatever that energy was, it could not handle its own stolen power, reflected back at it so sharply. Those massive tentacles spasmed. The suffocating grip on the basket suddenly loosened up. As the creature recoiled from the harsh glare, its blue pulses stuttering backward. This was his only real chance, and he had to lighten the load immediately. A heavy slab of dead wood was still lashed firmly to the basket rim. It was totally useless for building or trade, the only weight he could spare. He slashed the ropes and hurled the heavy log straight down into the jellyfish. Aiming right beside that blinded core, the dense, waterlogged timber crashed in and punched right through the flesh where his blade could never reach. The bell ruptured. The core light shattered, and the freezing, energy-draining pull vanished instantly. The creature tore apart around the wound, its heavy limbs sliding off his basket and clearing the canopy ropes, tumbling away into the vast gray fog below. Its ruined body sank after them, trailing fluid and dying light. The cold stopped. The freed burner caught its breath, and a hot flame roared back to life. Their terrifying plunge finally slowed, holding steady at last. He sat down hard against the wooden post, his heart hammering in his chest, and laughed out loud. It was messy and desperate. He had just killed a monster the size of his entire shelter using nothing but a cracked metal pot and some old wood he almost discarded. Now the glowing salvage marker flashes above the dying sky jellyfish before it sinks. He forces himself up, throwing out the grappling hook. Lost loot is gone forever. Hauling with all his strength, he drags a thick sheet of transparent membrane toward the basket. The beast's outer membrane is incredibly tough, far stronger than it looks. Right from the center, he carves out a dense, glowing lump of flesh. It radiates heat like a burning coal. The system inventory identifies the strange organ. Tucked deep inside the fading tentacles are two tiny, glowing discs. They are hard metal coins, stamped with unique sigils, which the inventory immediately absorbs. A new notification chime rings out. Inventory updated. He has cloud sap, tough membrane fibers, a heat gland, and wind coins, real money. His first real earnings in this brutal void, 2 small wind coins, actual cash. This realm tried to kill him, but he got his prize and then some. He climbs out of the deep rift, steadily feeding fuel to the burner. He guides the hot air balloon up, riding a gentle current away from danger. Reaching safer skies, he immediately begins crafting. That sticky cloud sap changes everything. He used to rely on weak thread, but now he has real adhesive. He smears the thick sap over the rough seams, pressing the torn sailcloth together. Cures fast, forming an airtight seal that no high-altitude wind can pierce. The crafting interface flashes with a successful notification. Windcraft recipe complete. Created sticky canopy patch, balloon sealed and fully reinforced. Upward lift is now stable. Next, he pulls out that glowing heat gland. Holding it right near the leaky burner, its purpose becomes instantly clear. The raw heat escaping from the metal cracks suddenly stops. This organ stores warmth. He wraps the gland around the burner, holding it tight against the damaged metal. Using strong strips of the jellyfish membrane, now it catches the stray warmth and funnels that energy straight back into the central flame instead of losing it. He smiles at the poetic justice of it, despite his hands shivering violently. That monster almost froze him to death by absorbing his warmth. Now the cold-hearted organ will keep him warm. Talk about some sweet payback. The burner stops. It finally stops drinking fuel like a starving beast. A steady, clean flame. His overall lift time begins to climb on screen. He watches the number jump, past minutes, past an hour, into safety. For the first time, he can stop counting his remaining seconds in panic. Windcraft recipe complete. Crafted heat-saving burner wrap. Fuel consumption reduced. Flight is stable for hours now. Hours. He slumps against the wooden basket, breathing easily. Honestly, he really needed this win. He has not relaxed since waking up midair. The balloon canopy flies perfectly. His burner runs slow and steady. He has food, water, rope, and glue. Plus a mirror, a membrane, and 2 coins. The approaching storm has stopped. Getting closer on his radar, he is still stuck in a torn balloon. But at least this flying death trap is finally working with him, not against him. In the harsh Skyrift Realm, that is basically a massive victory. One task remains. And he must act fast. Up here, survival leaves absolutely no room for mistakes. He sits on his assets. He calls up the sky market. A plain panel appears. No faces, no chatter, just cold trade where everyone sells what they bled for. He has absolutely no use for that jellyfish membrane, not anymore. Only a few strips went to his burner, but membrane like that. Trades incredibly well to folks who cannot salvage soft gear themselves. He lists it, sold instantly. Wind coins slide straight into his count. With those coins, he buys the one thing he has missed since day one. A proper steel needle, fine and strong, no more faking it. He had been using a dull knife point. Now, the market trade is complete. Jellyfish membrane out, wind coins in. He finally has the steel needle. It settles into his inventory. He closes the panel with a sigh of relief. Honestly, a steel needle makes him happier than a cannon ever could. He would not even know how to fire a cannon, but a needle. He knows it perfectly. In skilled hands, a needle is worth a fortune up here. Most people will never understand that. Having earned a break, he takes one. He sits low in the basket. The steady burner warms his bare back. His jacket is gone, but he simply watches the smooth gray air slide by. Faraway castles throw their light. For a brief moment, nothing attacks him. The world finally lets him rest. Then, the light above suddenly shifts. A shadow crosses the cloud, too massive for any bird. He looks up. Look closely because a piece of the high sky is literally coming apart. A massive castle platform, once floating safely, tears completely loose from its anchor. It tumbles down, enormous and slow, falling out of the bright sky. It plummets straight toward his lair, shedding debris with every second. Planks, chains, and broken railings spin wildly. Underneath the wreckage trails a massive tangle of rigging that once tied it to something larger. And from deep inside those falling ropes, something alive is screaming out. This is no metal shriek from an iron beak monster. It is a human voice, high, furious, and absolutely terrified. He can almost make out actual words cutting through the howling wind. That sound hits his gut in a way those monsters never could. Those were threats. This is a person, or close enough to one. His body knows the difference. They are caught in the falling rigging. Plummeting out of the safe sky straight into his lair, every instinct screams at him to steer clear. The platform is absolutely massive. Going underneath a descending wreck to rescue a screaming stranger is pure madness. Let's be real, this is exactly the kind of decision that gets salvagers killed. He has stable lift, hours of safety, and everything he nearly died for. But all of it is on the line if he turns toward the wreck. He turns toward it anyway, reaching for the hook, no hesitation. Going under a falling object is suicide. He knows this basic rule. It is the kind of truth known in the gut before being taught. The platform falling out of the sky is the size of a town square. Heavily armored underneath, it sheds planks and heavy chains as it tumbles. Any single piece of that falling debris would instantly crush his canopy. The storm drags him straight down. A smart, careful scavenger would stay back. He should have let the debris fall past him into the gray depths below. He could just grab whatever floated his way, but that castle wood was high-grade material. High-quality castle rope meant he would not have to salvage frayed scraps anymore. Metal hooks and solid fittings on that falling platform could easily save him years. It would double his balloon's life, but somewhere inside that spinning wreck, someone screamed. A desperate human voice was falling with the debris. He could not just ignore that. He spent all day treating this world as a series of cold, mechanical problems. Most of those challenges he solved easily, but a living person plummeting from the sky. That was something he could not turn his back on and still live with himself. Instead of fleeing, he immediately starts calculating a wild rescue angle. The massive platform was not falling straight. In this sky, nothing ever fell straight. It corkscrewed slowly. One heavy corner led the plunge, swinging the bottom section wide. All the trailing ropes whipped through the air like the tail of a giant kite. If he approached from the outside edge of that spinning arc into open air, he could avoid getting crushed by the main body of the heavy deck itself. He could drift right next to the wreck for just a few precious seconds. No lethal debris hanging directly over his head, but a few seconds was nothing. A tiny window was all this sky ever gave him. He had to work fast. He either succeeded in that heartbeat or died trying. He cranks up the burner. Leaning his basket into the path of the swing, he matches the wreck's descent. It is a rough ride for a torn balloon. The massive ropes sweep right toward him. A huge, chaotic web of castle rope and shattered lines. Suddenly, the system alerts him. A bright salvage marker flashes, warning him exactly what he is flying straight into. It reads high-value debris, danger, living monster-type life form entangled. Monster type, but that voice had actual words in it. The game system did not care. To this cold world, anything that was not human got the exact same flat label. He would learn soon enough how dangerously wrong that flat label could be. But right now, he reads monster on his screen, forcing a brutal choice. He makes the cold, hard calculation of a professional scavenger. A beast tangled in heavy ropes could not easily attack his balloon. The high-value materials were the real prize here. The smart move was to cut the net. He could grab the planks, ropes, and metal, leaving the trapped creature behind. Let it plummet with the remaining wreck. He hooks his line into the rigging and pulls. Drawing closer, he pulls out his knife to slash the net free. But as he gets close enough to see the trapped creature, it looks like a woman. Or close enough that his human instincts refuse to call her anything else. Yet her non-human features make the sight even more shocking. She has wings. Massive, beautiful white wings growing directly from her shoulder blades. But one of those wings is broken, bent at a horrifying, unnatural angle. Long feathers are crushed and ruined where some heavy impact shattered the bone. Tangled helplessly by that broken wing and one arm, she dangles as the wreck spins. She has curled her entire body tightly around that ruined wing to protect it. Huddled over her injury, the way any wounded creature instinctively shields its pain. She absorbs the violent battering of the fall, desperate to shield her broken wing. He avoided touching the parts of her already battered and caught in the ropes. Thick iron bolts pin the net at sharp angles, short, heavy crossbow bolts. The kind launched from a deck-mounted weapon. 3 of them were buried deep. They sunk into the rigging right beside her. Someone had targeted the poor girl, either shooting her down or blasting the platform, leaving the heavy bolts in the netting. As she and the debris plunged through the air, she spotted him and his knife. Her face twisted into a look he would never forget. It was not fear. It was pure raw fury. She bared her sharp teeth, screaming through the wind. Most of her words were swallowed by the howling air, but he caught enough. A fierce curse, followed by a ragged, desperate plea buried beneath her anger. Do not sell my feathers. Right then, he decided to stop salvaging. He would wonder for years why those words changed his life so completely. Her screams alone had not stopped him. No, it was because she knew. She knew exactly what a desperate scavenger would do to a creature like her. She knew her beautiful wings were worth a fortune in the sky markets. Feathers sold just like common goods. A stranger holding a sharp blade meant danger. He would look at a winged woman caught in netting and see nothing but easy profit, ready to tear her apart and sell her piece by piece to the highest bidder. With the last of her failing strength, she warned him she knew his dark intentions. She assumed he was just another greedy monster, but instead, he pocketed his knife. He avoided her flesh, carefully slicing through the thick netting and the surrounding ropes. This was delicate, dangerous work, ensuring his blade never touched her damaged, bleeding wing. He worked frantically as the wreckage plunged, his precious rescue window closing fast. He quickly sliced her arm free, then worked on the restraint around her waist. Slipping his arm beneath her torso, he dragged her free from the rigging. He pulled her into his basket just as the platform spiraled away. It plunged deep into the gray abyss, taking all his valuable salvage with it. He let it go. He had a living person in his basket now, not ropes. He told himself that money would come some other way, as it always did. But get this, she repaid his kindness by trying to slaughter him the moment she landed. A smarter man would have expected this, but he had been naive. He had just dragged her away from a horrific death she never should have survived. Some foolish part of him hoped it brought a moment of peace. It did not. She sprang up instantly, her good hand curled into a deadly, clawed fist. Her nails were sharper than steel, aimed directly at his exposed neck. She struck with everything she had, believing he was just another ruthless hunter. A hunter keeping her alive only to pluck her feathers at his leisure. He quickly hoisted a broken supply crate between them to block her assault. The loose wooden lid was the only shield within his immediate reach. He slammed it flat against her strikes just in the nick of time. Her sharp claws raked the wood instead of his skin, sending a shockwave up his arm. She hit with unbelievable force despite being battered, bleeding, and totally exhausted. Had she been at full strength, she would have shredded the wood and him. But the sheer force of her own strike threw her injured wing off balance. Seizing the brief pause, he shouted the only words that might save him now. He calls it a balloon. She keeps glaring, but she does not strike again. He takes that silence as permission to keep talking about his torn basket. It is a patched canopy and a cracked burner wrapped in monster guts. He tells her he only has a dull knife, a steel needle, and 2 coins. He could not kidnap her if he wanted to, since there is no cage. There is barely even a floor. A real hunter would have a fort and cannons. They would have shot her instead of cutting her loose. He watches her face, taking in the patches, the wrapped burner, and the absolute wreck of a rig. Calculating the danger just like he does when assessing a threat. She is proud and deeply suspicious, her entire posture screaming that she trusts absolutely nothing, but she is not stupid. His words are plainly true. A hunter does not show up in a falling wreck of a balloon held together by mere stitches and glue. They would arrive in a war machine. Gently, she lowers her good hand. She does not relax at all. But she stops trying to tear his throat open, curling back down over her broken wing to keep it out of reach while warily watching him. This tense truce does not last long because her dripping blood creates a trail. It has been falling through the sky, and something dark in the gray mist has caught the scent, and just like that, a pack of skywolves rises up. 4 of them circle in a loose formation, nothing like simple seagulls. They have sleek, long bodies built for high-altitude flight, featuring broad gliding membranes. These membranes stretch between their legs like flying squirrels, letting them glide and bank. They ride the wind currents with lethal grace, boasting razor-sharp teeth and clear intent. These monsters are not just drifting around, they are actively hunting a warm, bleeding meal inside the basket, targeting both of them. Suddenly, they spiral upward, circling the balloon to size it up. The terrifying, synchronized way they move together proves they are highly experienced pack hunters. The bird woman spots them immediately, though. Before he even finishes counting, and she does something completely unexpected, she actually helps. 2 below 2 climbing, she warns, her voice rough and clipped. The climbers will target the canopy. Once they tear the cloth, everyone falls. Then they feast on the way down. She warns him not to watch the visible ones. She knows their habits. She has clearly lived in these skies her entire life, reading the wild pack as easily as he reads a torn canvas seam. She is giving him the exact crucial details needed to survive the ambush. He finally has a guide for the air, even if she was trying to kill him moments ago. Honestly, trusting her warnings is his only real shot at survival. Any other choice ends with his canopy shredded to ribbons. he has no range weapon. But he does have sticky cloud sap and a basket packed with heavy rope. He can use the rope, the adhesive sap, and a tension snare to strike back. Working frantically while she tracks the pack, he smears the thick cloud sap along. A long loop of the heavy rope, coating the entire length in sticky adhesive. He rigs this makeshift snare across the open side of the basket, right in their path. Any beast diving for the canopy will have to pass through it. With one end anchored to the post, he holds the spare hook and waits. The snare is set, and the birdwoman keeps her eyes locked on the sky. She suddenly warns him of a climber on the left committing to its leap. He doesn't even look. He simply trusts her word and swings the sap-covered loop right across the path of an oncoming beast. It is a wolf he never actually sees until it dives straight from the canopy above into his trap. The beast lands exactly where she predicted, plunging headfirst into the sticky rope. The line snags its front limb and wing membrane, instantly sticking fast and trapping the lunging creature. Its momentum turns against it as he grabs the weighted end, pulling down with all his might. He swings the trapped wolf far away from their basket, hanging it out over the empty edge. Dangled over the open abyss where the fierce storm winds howl, he quickly cuts the anchor line. The beast plunges into the depths with its wing completely glued shut by the sticky sap. The powerful storm winds instantly drag the helpless predator down into the endless clouds. It vanishes into the gray without a single howl. Immediately, she warns of another climber behind him. She keeps calling out targets, and this unspoken partnership starts working beautifully under pressure. Her eyes guide his hands, turning a hopeless slaughter into a battle they might actually survive. He meets the second climber with the iron feather he pried off the gull earlier. That sharp weapon is remarkably stiff and lethal, acting just like a dagger along its spine. He lacks a proper spear, but driving a razor-sharp feather into a lunging beast works just as well. A wolf mid-leap has no way to change its path once it commits to the dive. He drives the feather deep into its throat, twists it, and shoves the dying weight away. He pushes the carcass off the rim before its thrashing limbs can tangle his precious rope. Now the two wolves waiting below, the ones she warned him to ignore, finally make their move. With their pack mates dead, they attack, but they are far more cautious now. They circle instead of diving, having witnessed the brutal fate of the first two. Honestly, hesitating in a fight like this is the quickest way to end up dead. These beasts have lost their courage along with their numbers, and their confidence is completely shattered. One wolf gives up entirely, peeling off into the thick clouds to search for easier prey. The very last wolf makes a desperate, incredibly fast charge directly at the low basket. He meets it at the rim with a wooden crate lid and his dull knife ready. Blocking the impact with the lid, he drives the blade right under the wing membrane. The beast collapses and spins off into the chaotic storm winds, following its fallen pack. Just like that, the sky clears. The basket is now covered in blood, sap, and feathers. Against all odds, they are both still alive. He immediately begins gathering loot instead of resting. This obsessive looting habit is what kept him alive today, and he won't stop now. First, he harvests a long, curved fang from the wolf he just killed at the rim. The yellow tooth is incredibly hard and sharp, paired with a stretch of tough wing hide. This light and remarkably strong beast hide is the best crafting material he has found yet. He also inspects the salvage rescued earlier, including a length of sturdy castle rope. There are also 2 whole seasoned wood planks and heavy iron bolt tips from the net. He carefully pries these metal tips out of the netting where the hunters fired them. These iron points are incredibly versatile. Finally, he picks up one last item belonging to her. He turns the object over gently in his hands, a light metal wing brace. The frame of light metal and leather is completely bent and broken from the crash. It was designed to support an injured wing, but snapped completely during the violent fall. Placed on her already damaged wing, the brace ultimately failed her when she needed it most. His system inventory updates, listing all his newly acquired survival resources. New crafting recipes immediately flood his mind as the materials register. The system reads the materials in his hands and analyzes his recent handiwork. Windcraft recitation completes, adding the newly crafted rope guardrail to the basket. Another recitation finishes, bone spear effect crafted, his first true weapon. A spear forged from skywolf fang and platform wood alongside the guardrail. He runs the sap-strung castle rope along the rim right then and there. Right where the wolves almost broke in, securing it with bolt tips. He drives them into the wicker to create handholds, snare points, and a safety barrier. This would stop anyone from tumbling over during sharp turns. Next, the bone spear. It takes longer, lashing and sapping the wolf fang to the platform wood. Soon it sets into a lethal point on a solid shaft, his first real weapon. Something to keep threats at a distance, far away from his own throat. Feeling its weight in his hand, his posture shifts. Men with spears stand differently. It beats holding a dull knife. Nearby, the silent woman watches his every move. She sits hunched in the corner where he dragged her, cradling her broken wing. Turning to face her, he does not grab her or speak in soft, empty tones. He avoids anything that might trigger her defenses. Instead, he holds up the brace. He displays his tools, a steel needle, some tough rope fiber, and the cloud sap. He asks her if he can look. She just stares. The tension here is absolutely insane. He understands the sheer weight of his request. Her wing is everything to her. She shielded it with her entire body during a fall that should have killed her. It is the highly prized limb she begged a stranger not to sell off. Her most vulnerable point, and he is asking permission to lay hands on it. A hunter would have just grabbed it. If you make it worse, she warns him. She promises to open his throat before she dies, a clear, deadly warning. He is a repairman at heart. He has fixed countless broken frames, from umbrellas to kites. Cheap folding chairs and tents are no different. This wing brace is just another frame. There is nothing to fear, not once you look past what the frame is attached to. He barely touches the flesh of the wing itself, focusing entirely on the brace. He splines the snapped frame using pieces of platform wood and a bolt tip. He binds it with rope fiber, carefully reshaping the brace and adding beast hide padding. Placing the hide over her injury, he bonds the joints using the cloud sap. This ensures the structure holds during flight. It is incredibly careful, delicate work. He approaches this task just like his best jobs back home, slow, sure, and quiet. He talks her through every step beforehand, so she is never caught off guard. Every touch is expected. She remains completely rigid through the first part. She is ready to strike if his hands wander or make a mistake. Her eyes track his every movement, like watching a stranger hold your most precious treasure. But the quality work speaks for itself. A hunted creature knows the difference. They instinctively recognize the difference between a hand that takes and one that mends. It is a lesson learned faster than words. Then, during his slow and careful work, she stops bracing herself to fight him, finally letting him do his job. Her tense breathing finally eases, her good wing, which had been raised to shield. The injured one slowly lowers. She does not offer any words of thanks. But she stops guarding herself against him, a silent trust that means so much more. He finishes. He gently eases the mended brace back. He fitted the splint onto her wing, and she flexed it once to test. The splinted frame held her bones steady, just like the old brace did. Before it failed, she could not fly yet. He told her that plainly because lying to a patient is the worst thing a fixer can do. The bone underneath needed far more time to heal, but the wing was supported and held in place now, meaning it would not grind itself worse with every movement. She could feel the difference, looking at him with an expression, no longer pure fury, and yet not quite trust either. For the first time, she was truly paying attention. Bake Riina. She said. It took him a second to realize she was sharing her name. A creature the system classified as a monster type was telling a human who she was. I am not your pet, she warned him. I am not your prize, and I am not staying because I owe you. I am staying because I cannot fly, and a grounded bird in the sky is a dead bird. Your wreck is just the only thing falling slowly enough to keep me alive. The moment my wing carries me, I am gone. Understand that you are better company than a load of rope. I will give you that. She did not smile, but the corner of her mouth twitched, as if she had considered it and decided against it. On principle, and that was enough. Their tense truce held while the burner steadied and the sky stayed quiet. After a while, watching the gray clouds slide past, she spoke up once more. This time there was no fury in her voice at all, only a cold, quiet certainty that he would soon learn to recognize whenever she talked about the things she hated most. The bolts in that net, she muttered. You should know where they came from. Those were not wild shots. There is a fort up there, a massive floating fort, and the man who owns it does not hunt for food. He hunts vessels. He waits for things to fall the way you and I are falling, and he strips them for parts while the owners are still alive on them. He shot my wing out so my platform would crash where he could easily pick it clean. She turned her head and stared at him with those sharp, pale eyes. He took my tribes feathers the same way, and a torn balloon that has learned to survive a Fall is exactly the kind of thing he will come for next, a balloon that cannot. Steer is not a vessel, it is just a leaf. He understood that heavy truth after. Riina told him about the fort. As long as he could only rise and fall, he went. Wherever the wind decided, the wind in Skyrift Realm did not care if it carried him toward food or toward a hunter who shot down vessels for parts. He had sealed canopy, a burner that ran for hours, a spear and a guardrail, but none of that mattered if the only direction he could choose was up or down. He needed to be able to say no to current. He needed steering, and he did. Not have the slightest idea how to build it. He had built things that moved before, of course, a kite is something you steer from the ground, and an umbrella is something that fights the wind. The basic principle was no mystery to him, but a kite has a string and a hand holding the other end. Up here, there was no ground, no fixed point to pull against, nothing but air and whatever canvas surface he could hang in it. Steering a balloon meant steering against absolute empty space, using only the push of the wind on a shape he controlled, making this a completely different challenge than any he had ever solved at his workbench. It required a teacher who had been born directly into the air. Riina was that teacher, even if she would never call it teaching. She would have bared her teeth at that word, but it was the truth, and she sat there. Her braced wing was folded carefully against her back, and her eyes scanned the sky like a torn seam, reading each layer. After a while, she began telling him what she saw, not to help him, but because watching a human stare blindly at wind he could not read physically pained her. Pain her, you keep looking at the clouds, she said, but clouds are slow. By the time they show you a current, the air has already changed. Watch. The small things, she pointed with her chin at a loose feather, one of her own, shed from her injured wing and caught against the guardrail. It trembled, lay flat, then lifted and streamed sideways before he felt any wind change against his own skin. A breath later, the basket leaned as a new current took hold. The feather knew before you did, she muttered. So does loose cloth or the smoke. Off your burner if you watch where it bends. The sky tells you everything it is about to do, a few seconds early, if you stop waiting to feel it on your skin. And start watching the light. She nodded at the long shadows thrown by the high castles down through the cloud, and wherever a shadow begins to ripple, the air under it is broken. Steer around the ripple to keep your canopy, steer into it, and you learn why her wing is splined. He spent the next stretch doing nothing but watching feathers, smoke, and the rippled edges of shadows, feeling like a fool, but learning faster than he had in years. Anything in years. Slowly, the sky stopped being a blank wall of gray and became a thing with grain, like wood with a direction he could work along or against. He would never read it the way she did, born to it as she was. But he could read it enough to know where the currents ran, mastering half of steering that no rope could teach him. At first, he got it wrong constantly. He would call a current too late or read a feather's flutter entirely wrong. Riina would make a short, disgusted sound in her throat and correct him instantly. She never softened any of it. The burner smoke was his best guide. He learned to watch the thin line of it rise and then bend, noting the direction it bent to see which way the air above the basket was already moving. A heartbeat before that same air reached him, when he trusted the smoke. Over his own skin, he stopped being surprised by the sudden, violent lurches had thrown him around all day. Riina noticed and stopped making that disgusted sound, which from her was a kind of praise. Your eyes are slow, but they learn, she allowed, watching him catch a current shift off a shed feather and lean into it before it hit. Most humans never learn at all. They think the sky is empty because they cannot feel it. The sky is never empty, but rather the most crowded thing there is, and he was only now starting to see it. He asked her, while keeping his eyes on the feathers, how she had learned this. And she stayed silent so long, he thought she would ignore the question. Then she answered, flat, cold, and short, a heavy cost in every word. Her tribe lived along the storm edge, where the wind was at its absolute worst. Reading the wind was the difference between a fledgling living or falling. They taught their young to read the sky before anything else. Because a white wing that cannot read currents belongs to the storm, she had read the sky her entire life. All her sky knowledge could not save her wing from that brutal harpoon strike. No wind reading can warn a person when someone on a fort decides to shoot them down. The lingering bitterness over that wound was the first real piece of herself she actually shared. She could survive any storm in the sky, but people were something she had not learned to read. He did not press for more, knowing better than to pry at a freshly opened emotional wound. Instead, he focused on the shifting smoke, while she quietly went back to correcting his mistakes. Their lessons continued, but to build the other half of his steering mechanism, he needed a missing part. Riina spotted the solution first, her sharp, sky-trained eyes locking onto something in the distance. She saw a distinct shape where he only saw wreckage. A broken roof was drifting ahead. It was the peaked top of a sky house, torn completely loose and tumbling slowly through the air. Bolted to the ridge was a wind vane, battered and half-shattered, but still solid enough to use. A broad, flat metal blade on a pivot, designed to align itself automatically with the rushing currents. That vane was the exact surface he needed. A simple balloon cannot steer on heat alone. It requires some resistance for the currents to push against, a sail, a rudder, or a vane. He needed an adjustable surface to catch the air, forcing the sky to turn him rather than carry him. But reaching that wreckage meant crossing open sky, where two iron-beaked gulls were already circling. They hovered over the drifting roof, drawn to the metal just like the first creature before. Riina started calling out their flight paths, reading them perfectly just as she had with the wolves. She mapped out their movements in advance, letting him guide the basket through the narrow gaps. He maneuvered closer, aiming to hook the heavy vane and rip it free from the ruined wood. Move fast, he could never give those aggressive birds a clean shot at his canopy. Trust me, it was not that easy. The first beast dove straight at them the moment they closed in. Without any way to steer, he faced a brutal choice: take the impact or drop and lose the vane. Lacking that steering paddle, he only had his burner and the steady sound of Riina's voice. But as it turned out, her voice was more than enough to save them. Predicting the dive before the bird even folded its wings, she shouted for him to drop. He killed the burner instantly, letting the entire basket plummet down a few feet. The screeching predator sliced through empty air, missing their balloon by inches as the second one attacked. This new beast adjusted its angle, diving low to strike just as they began to rise. He prepared for it, bracing his body against the guard rail and raising his sharp bone spear. Thrusting the point outward, he forced the giant bird to abort its dive or face impalement. In that split second of hesitation, he reached out, hooking the metal vane off the ridge. He hauled the heavy metal piece aboard. One predator shrieked in absolute fury. The other gave up the chase, leaving the ruined roof to plunge down into the gray abyss. Constructing the actual steering mechanism consumed the rest of their quiet, calm flight. He bound the metal vane to a sturdy wooden beam, mounting it securely to a corner post. Using a bolt and heavy rope as a pivot, he rigged control lines back to his basket. Positioned where he could easily grasp them, pulling either line would now shift the vane. This allowed him to angle the blade directly into the wind, letting the air turn the balloon. He sealed every joint with sticky cloud sap. This was his most ambitious creation yet. Since waking up in this strange world, he had never attempted anything so complex. He built it like his old custom work, a frame designed to carry weight while remaining flexible. Anticipating every strain, he reinforced the pivot where pressure would inevitably build. A steering mechanism that snaps mid-flight is far more dangerous than having no control at all. He braced it for the worst, knowing a broken rudder meant certain disaster up here. The system panel chimes. He finally built something to upgrade his simple leaf. A proper boat is forming, Windcraft recipe complete, basic steering ropes crafted. Directional control is limited, but the balloon can now angle across currents. He tests it in the safest spot possible, where two broken currents meet. A narrow band of calm sits between them, and he attempts to cross. He hauls the heavy vane line, watching to see how the balloon responds. It answers, sluggish, clumsy, but completely real, turning exactly where he commands. This is his first controlled turn since waking up in free fall. The first try almost throws him off because he pulls way too hard. The basket slews around instantly, forcing Riina to grab the rail and curse. The second crossing goes smoother. By the third, he finally gets the feel. He figures out how much to haul and how long to hold the line. The balloon swings gracefully between currents, steering exactly where he wants it to. Riina watches the entire crossing with her arms folded in deep silence. She calls it the absolute worst flying she has ever witnessed in her life. But she admits it is actually flying, which is basically high praise from her. They do not get to celebrate. A massive, menacing shadow falls over them. It is no cloud or debris, but a solid, hard-edged mass. Perfect squared lines of a manufactured structure slide into view from above. He knows what it is before Riina even speaks, and honestly, things look grim. It is the flying fort, and it is far larger than he imagined. A squat armored block of scavenged plating, looking incredibly heavy and ugly. Glowing lift rings with dirty yellow edges keep the bristling monstrous structure afloat. This is no castle, it is a monster built from stolen ships. Mismatched deck plates and guardrails stolen from dozens of different wrecks line it. The leading edge swings directly toward them, aimed straight at their vessel. The long iron harpoon cannon aims downward, patched together with scrap metal. He spots pieces of vessels just like his, broken basket rims and frames. The tragic remains of fallen pilots have been stripped entirely clean. This flying fortress is a graveyard built by a ruthless survivor. He constructed his own life out of those who failed to survive. A single figure stands by the cannon, and Riina spits his name. Jang Muil, a name that tastes like poison. She never met him. But every winged survivor knows the terrible shape of his floating fort. She has waited a long time to face him without broken wings. No demands echo across the sky. There is no warning at all. That complete, eerie silence is the part that terrifies him the most. Historically, a man who talks first is someone who wants to negotiate. But this fort does not negotiate. A single cold notification flashes instead. The system coldly acknowledges the sudden, deadly threat they now face. It is the only warning the system decides he deserves. Attack detected. Hostile vessel Harpoon-class fort, the massive weapon fires. But the weapon is not aimed at him or Riina. He understands too late. He braced for a strike on the canopy, but the harpoon misses deliberately. It pierces the crucial salvage bundle, lashed tightly to his basket instead. He had just freed a massive bundle of salvaged castle rope, the heaviest piece on his rig. But the enemy harpoon struck, burying its barbed head deep into that very wood. A heavy cable ran from the weapon straight back to the hovering fort. As the cable snapped completely tight, the enemy fort began to reel him in. It was a cruel and highly efficient trick. They did not need to destroy his balloon. They only had to snag his heaviest salvage and let the dragging weight do the work. The cable hauled his basket sideways and down, dragging him through the empty sky. The brutal strain would soon tear his canopy, capsize his basket, or pull him. Right up to the fort, there, the enemy crew could finish him off at leisure. They were not hunting him, they were reeling him in like a hooked fish. The ugly genius of this trap was how it used his own greed against him. Any Skyfarer who salvaged valuable heavy gear had essentially painted a target on themselves. The enemy harpoon was designed to seek out that exact heavy, valuable mass. The better he did at surviving and collecting loot, the more vulnerable he became. A scavenger who had found nothing would have nothing for the harpoon to bite. But he had gathered a massive haul. That was the hook in his mouth. His basket tilted violently under the pulling cable. The canopy lines began to scream. Riina screamed through the wind, demanding they cut the cable and fight. Every proud instinct in his gut urged him to do exactly that. He wanted to grab his bone spear and make the enemy pay for their cruelty. Instead of choosing a suicidal battle, he chose his survival over foolish pride. He targeted the salvaged planks instead. It was an incredibly painful decision. That wood represented hours of agonizing work and survival in the sky. It was raw building material he had literally bled for, meant for vital upgrades. Every single fiber of his being screamed against wasting such precious, hard-won resources. But those planks were exactly what the enemy harpoon had latched onto. A man who refuses to let go of his cargo gets dragged down with it. He had seen this tragic mistake happen to others in the sky before. Foolish men who clung to a sinking ship because they had invested too much. In the end, their greed dragged them down to the abyss every single time. The wood was lost the second the harpoon struck. The only question was his survival. He sliced through the heavy ropes, holding the lumber directly to his basket. His tools worked rapidly, and with a sharp snap, the final cord parted. Instantly, the harpoon, the planks, and his hard-won wood were all jerked away. The massive load vanished, instantly relieving his struggling balloon rig. The crushing strain on his canopy disappeared. The basket violently snapped back level. The sudden jolt nearly threw them out, but the enemy only reeled in wood. He had saved his balloon, but Riina was absolutely furious. She wanted bloody vengeance. The brutal pilot of that fort had hunted her people and shattered her wing. Now she wanted a fight, but he was steering them away as fast as possible. He desperately hauled the steering lines, trying to catch a downward air current. He plunged them toward the gray clouds, while she bitterly yelled that he let him win. Her voice carried the raw fury of someone tired of being hunted. He calmly replied that he only let the enemy take a bundle of wood. He kept working the lines, watching the rail feathers to read the wind. He thinks stealing those planks taught Doha fear. In reality, that hunter just showed his hand. He revealed his trick. His harpoon cannon has only one line, and he wants this balloon intact. He wants Doha alive. That means he won't blow his balloon out of the sky. Not while he still thinks he can reel them in. That makes 3 crucial secrets Doha uncovered. 3 things he did not know this morning, and all it cost was a little wood. Doha catches Riena's eye. Pride is a luxury nobody can afford on a vessel this small. He tosses that pride right over the side, just like his old brass nameplate. You live longer without baggage. Riina stays silent, but at least she stops arguing. After a tense moment, she steps up to the rail to read the passing currents. She scans for ripples in the shadows, warning them of dangerous, broken air ahead. They descend away from the fort, guided by her keen eyes tracing a safe path. Doha keeps his hands on the controls. Up above, the massive fort refuses to follow. A beast that heavy does not chase. It will simply wait for another chance to strike. It will wait until the winds push them back up, a reality they both understand. Talk about an awkward ride. Standing side by side during this drop feels incredibly tense. Just an hour ago, she wanted to slit his throat. Now, she is keeping him alive. She uses her rare sky sense to guide him, not out of kindness, but survival. Her survival is fully tied to his. A grounded bird still needs the vessel to fly. She needs this ride to descend safely, whether she likes her pilot or not. It is certainly not friendship, but it is an alliance born of pure necessity. 2 outcasts rejected by the safe skies, sharing a rail and reading the same wild wind. They run hard, putting distance between themselves and the tyrant who treats them as spare parts. Finally, they level out in a calm gray mist. Doha relaxes the burner and catches his breath. Half of his precious wood is gone, but he finally gains some control. It is clumsy, but it is real steering. Finally, some good news for our pilot. More importantly, Doha now understands his hunter, a lesson far more valuable than lost timber. He repeats this to himself, trying hard to believe his own comforting words. But he silences his regret over the lost wood. There is no time for grief. Morning salvage is a luxury for those who are not currently plummeting toward the abyss. Riina is the first to spot where their lost planks went, tracking them purely by habit. She watches the bundle fall, discarded by a fort that could not be bothered to retrieve it. The wood had snapped free from the harpoon, tumbling wildly down until she freezes. Her sudden stiffness is a clear sign that she has spotted something crucial below. She points far below where the gray mist darkens, calling out to Doha. The fog bleeds into a bruised, deep blue layer where the air itself flickers. She warns him that his wood fell into a storm pocket, urging him to look closer. Doha tracks her gaze down into a violent, swirling vortex deep within the clouds. Silent lightning flickers through the storm as the planks drift down. They are heading right toward an ancient, ruined castle floating in the sky. Strange objects grow along those crumbling beams, feeding directly on the lightning. Massive blue crystals hum with energy, pulsing with a bright, jagged light. They flicker in perfect sync, with the storm pocket raging around them. Even from up here, Doha can feel the raw, overwhelming energy radiating from them. This fuel could supercharge his burner far beyond anything he has ever salvaged. Riina whispers that they are storm crystals, her voice filled with pure dread. Every vessel in the realm wants it, burning hotter and longer than any fuel stone. A balloon running on storm crystal could easily climb away from a fort like his. She turned to look at him, already knowing exactly what he was about to say. Her jaw was firmly set, knowing those crystals only grow in places where nothing survives. Whatever goes down there never comes back up, right at the storm's upper edge. That layer means absolute death. Do you understand? Pure death. He stared at the blue crystals glowing in the dark, then looked up toward the sky. Up there, a graveyard fort waited for the wind to push him back into range. Directly in range of its cannons, above him, a man waiting to tear him apart. Below him, a deadly layer of storm that claimed everything foolish enough to enter. Yet it held the only power source capable of carrying him out of reach. This realm was built on a brutal lesson. Every exit path was a death trap. And honestly, the only real choice he has here is picking his own poison. He was trapped right at the very edge of that terrifying storm. A place of certain death, and his only option was to dive straight down. Heading directly toward the nightmare this whole world warned him to flee from. During his first day of falling, he had learned to separate 2 distinct fears. The first kind keeps you alive, that sudden cold tightening deep in your gut. It warns you when a current is broken or when to commit to a dive. He had trained himself to listen to that survival instinct like an instrument. But the second kind is a paralyzing dread that only wants you to stop. It fills your entire body with dread, screaming at you to find any excuse to quit. Those glowing blue crystals in the storm pocket woke that exact paralyzing terror. And let's be real, he sat with that heavy dread for a long time. If you run when you should dive, or dive when you should run, you die. Riina desperately wanted him to run, but not out of sheer cowardice. She knew the terrifying truth of what actually weighted down in that storm. She made it clear that nothing going down there ever made it back. And she was entirely right. The smart play was to take the long route. He could easily ration his supplies and stay safe in the middle sky. In those skies, the dangers at least had faces he knew how to read. But playing it safe would lead him straight back into that deadly fort. That was the real trap, and he laid out the truth for her flatly. Saying the words aloud helped him realize just how much he believed them. His burner could run for hours, but only on whatever fuel he could scavenge. Scavenged fuel meant climbing slowly and draining his energy fast while Mua's fort was heavy and slow, but it never tired and never stopped in the high air. It blocked every single path leading up and out of this storm layer. Any current carrying him towards safety would only push him back into danger. Right into cannon range, he could never outclimb a man who owned the skies. To slip past him, he needed a level of power that Mua could never hope to match. That power grew inside the ruins of a place known to kill everything. Riina quietly asked if he was truly willing to trade one death for another. He replied that he would rather trade a certain death for one he could actually fight. Mua has cannons, but the storm only has lightning, beasts, and toxic air. To beat the fort, but he has spent his entire life learning to handle. Things breaking right in front of him, he would rather bet on the storm. At least the storm does not want his feathers. She did not laugh, but something in her face shifted. After a moment, she stepped to the rail and looked down into the pocket with him. He knew she had decided to come when she began pointing out what she saw, instead of telling him to stop. Diving into that storm pocket felt nothing like the wind shear. The shear had been violent but honest, two clean winds fighting, and he had learned to time them, but the storm pocket was a liar. Air down there did not run. In currents readable on a feather, it coiled and doubled back. Warm air pulled against cold, charged against dead, and the lightning that crawled silently through the cloud was not in the air. The air itself leaked light. Wherever pressure built too high, the deeper they dropped, the more the world stopped behaving. Eerie light came from everywhere and nowhere with no sun. And no shadow to give it a source, just the blue flicker pulsing through the clouds so he could not tell if a thing ahead was close or far. Large or small, solid or just a trick of the charged murk, his ears buzzed with it. Low, constant hum he felt in his teeth more than he heard, the sound of all that power crawling through the cloud made the hair on his arms stand and refused to settle back down. Riina proved her worth 100 times over in that descent. His eyes saw only flickering murk. She saw the difference between a coil that would carry them down gently and a coil that would slam them into ruin, and she called out the safe lines, low and steady, and he worked the valve on the burner to follow. She was flying half-blind too, she admitted. Later, because the storm edge confused even her sky sense, but half-blind, she still saw more than he did with full vision. Twice she pulled them off a line. Heartbeat before it would have killed them, reading some shift in the murk that he never noticed. It was on one of those brutal coils that her wing opened up again. The basket pitched without warning, harder than she had expected. A sudden blast of freezing air punched up under the canopy, and the whole rig dropped and slewed at once. He grabbed the corner post. Riina grabbed the nearest line to keep from going over the rail, but it was the wrong line. Loose end of the steering rig was still slack, giving under her weight instead of holding, and she lurched, throwing out her braced wing to catch herself, the way a winged person's body does automatically. The brace held, but the bone underneath did not. He heard the sickening wet snap through the wind and saw her face go white and rigid. The wing she nearly let him die. Protecting folded against her body, showing that the work he had done on it was undone. She did not cry out. Setting her jaw, she held the rail with her good hand and growled through her teeth to keep flying and not look at her. The crystal first fixed the wing on the ground if they survived to reach it. He hated it, but she was right. The worst thing he could have done in that Moment was stopped steering to fuss over a wound he could not treat in a falling. Basket, there is a hard kind of discipline in being a fixer, and it is. This you do not stop to grieve a thing while it is still breaking around you. He knew grief had to wait. Stopping halfway in a storm only gets everyone killed. He learned that lesson at a workbench, mending torn awnings before the rain hit. He had to choose between mourning the tear or fixing it. Up here, the stakes were their lives. The lesson remained the same. Grieve later, fly now. He kept piloting while she stood hurt and silent at the rail. He guided them down the final stretch into the ruins, slowly reading the wild sky. Guided by her sharp, painful corrections, they finally reached the ancient stone ruins. Old beams tangled ahead where storm crystals grew. He did not look at her injured wing. He could hear her agony in the quiet spaces between her short words. That small gasp before each direction fueled him. He held onto that sound. He swore a silent oath to make this right. This brave bird woman had nearly died. She had risked everything to shield her wing, sacrificing her safety to keep him alive. Up close, the storm crystals looked stunning, but completely unnatural. Long blue spears of crystal jutted from the ancient stone, humming with power. A thin skin of crawling light flowed across their facets like liquid water. He could feel raw energy radiating off them, prickling against his skin. The hair on his arms stood up. He realized what he was dealing with. He knew without being told that this volatile material easily kills a careless man. He targeted the nearest crystal with his hook, relying on its dry wooden handle. The rope was dry, and he had already guessed the golden rule of these crystals. He caught the base of the crystal with his tool and pulled hard. He hauled on the line, working the stubborn piece loose from the ruined wall. A single drop of water from the humid air rolled down the rope toward his hand. Suddenly, the crystal snapped free. A brutal shockwave raced right up the wet cord. The electric jolt nearly stopped his heart. It was not a fatal lightning strike, but a massive pulse that forced his hand open, throwing him hard against the rail. This is where the real lesson hits him, brutal, fast, and absolute. The crystal electrified everything wet, the damp rope, the moist air, his sweaty hand. Moisture was the perfect conduit for this deadly force. He was barely holding on. He survived only because the rope was mostly dry, keeping the shock minimal. Shaking the numbness from his arm, he stared at the prize dangling from his hook. It was completely loose, humming with dangerous energy, exactly what they needed. Dryness was key. He understood the rule now, and that gave him a fighting chance. Immediately, he stripped away every damp material, securing a safe grip. He wrapped dry sailcloth around his hands, grasping the wooden hook tightly. The dangerous shard was almost secure when the entire ruin suddenly woke up. A massive cloud of thunder moths erupted from the ancient wooden beams. They had been nesting in stone cracks, feeding on the wild lightning energy. Now the crack of the crystal and the escaping power woke the entire nest. Dozens of them swarmed into the dark pocket of the ruined castle. Each moth was as large as 2 hands, boasting dusty gray wings. Their wings crackled with electricity, throwing miniature arcs of light between them. They were not the most terrifying beasts he had ever faced in battle. They had no fangs, but they were lethal because of where they stood. This place was packed with charged crystal, and moisture meant instant death. They were surrounded by a swarm crackling with electricity, a single tiny arc. Hitting the crystal or the burner at the wrong moment would end everything. Of course, the swarm went straight for the burner flame first. They were moths. The flame was the hottest, brightest thing in the storm pocket, and the whole swarm turned toward it together, drawn to the only burner keeping them afloat. If those creatures reached it, they would snuff it out completely or foul. Mechanism with their crackling wings, sending them plummeting down those last short meters into the deep storm. Crystal still in hand, he had to move. 3 things had to happen fast, and in the exact right order to survive. First came the dry sailcloth, already wrapped around his hands. He threw it over the storm crystal hanging on the hook. He wrapped the deadly humming object in the dry fabric, keeping wet air and stray electrical arcs away from it while cutting off the bright glow that called to the moths. Smothered under the cloth, the crystal went dark, completely safe. The swarm lost interest and shifted back toward the flame. Next was the water gourd. This would be the single most crucial throw of his entire early career. The moths craved light but feared water, whereas the crystal absolutely loved moisture. He held a gourd half full of precious water, too valuable to waste, yet too dangerous to keep, since any water near the crystal meant instant death. With a sudden throw, he hurled the gourd far from the basket, crystal, and burner sending it shattering into the pitch-dark pocket. It was a perfect distraction. The flying water droplets in the charged air instantly drew a web of snapping electricity. A sudden flash of light and sound erupted, forcing the swarm off the burner. They chased the spray, unable to resist. Now the brightest thing round was that glowing spray of water, and the moths swarmed toward it. It was a painful sacrifice to throw that water away. Water meant survival up here, and he had bled a wind jellyfish and dived a wind shard just to fill it. Yet he was scattering it into a storm pocket just to buy himself 10 precious seconds. A repairman quickly learns which tools to keep and which to spend. Right now, that water was a tool he had to spend. A full gourd means nothing if they get dropped into the deep. He could find water again, but time, that was gone forever. Third came his bone spear, aimed at the one beast that did not turn. The largest moth, a massive creature nearly the size of a gull, ignored the distraction. It flew straight for the burner flame, slow, steady, and smart. It was the oldest of the swarm, completely unfazed. He intercepted the creature midair. His spear was braced and ready as the massive moth charged the fire. He drove the bone tip straight through the center of its crackling body. A massive electrical arc surged down the shaft, making his hair stand on end and burning his palm where the wood was damp, but the spear held. The moth exploded on the point, dust and dying light scattered. He shook the remains off the rail into the dark. Then the pocket went completely silent, like the calm after the worst of a storm. Standing there in the quiet dark, smoke rising from his scorched palm, while the wrapped crystal hummed on its hook, and Riina stood pale and silent. Her ruined wing up against everything. They were still alive. He worked the loot fast because the swarm would settle and return. He did not want to be caught in that pocket when they did. From the largest moths he gathered a heap of gray dust off its wings, which the system tagged as something worth far more than dust had any right to be. From where the storm crystal had grown, he worked free more than just one shard, careful with the dry cloth. His burned hand clumsy. There was a dense charred lump inside the moth where the light had gathered, a gland like the jellyfish heat gland, but humming with a different power. Entangled in the beams was the cracked head of an old hook another salvager had left behind when the storm took him, alongside a length of charred fiber that had once been a wing like Renew's, which he did not show her. Inventory updated: storm crystal shard, thunder moth dust, charred wing fiber. Lightning gland, cracked beam hook. He did not craft in the pocket. He climbed out of there first, taking the long, careful way. Riina read the safe coils through her pain while he worked the vein. Only when they had risen back into the honest gray of the middle sky and found a quiet band did he let the burner settle and turn to the crystal, the materials, and the work. The storm crystal changed the burner the way the cloud sap had changed the patches, wrapped carefully in dry sailcloth and thunder moth dust, which turned out to insulate against the shock the way nothing wet ever could. The crystal fed the burner heat that no fuel stone could match. He built it into the burner as a booster second source of lift he could open up when he needed to climb hard and fast. When the recipe panel chimed, he had built the thing that might finally let him rise out of mule reach. Windcraft recipe complete. Crafted lift booster effect. Lift booster effect. Rapid climb capability. Pushes balloon above heavy storm wind. Warning: high fuel consumption. This warning was no joke. The booster devoured fuel the way the wind jellyfish had eaten heat, fast and hungry. He understood at once that it was not something he could run all the time. It was strictly for emergencies, a hard climb out of danger, a burst to clear a current he could not cross any other way. Then he would have to shut it down and live on the ordinary burner before it drank him dry. Power always came with a leash up there. This world never gave him a gift that did not also charge him for. He had seen the same law in every upgrade so far. The cloud sap sealed his canopy but added weight. The heat gland saved fuel, but he had nearly died of cold to take it. Now the booster would carry him above the storm wind and out of reach from the fort, and it would burn through his fuel so fast that he would have to spend half his salvage runs just feeding it. Nothing up here was free. Only the people in the castles got things for free, but get this, they were going to learn sooner or later that a thing you did not pay for is a thing you do not know how to keep. The thunder moth dust gave him the second recipe, and this one he had not expected but came to love. The dust held a charge, and woven through a net of rope fiber and beast hide, it made a device that could throw That charge into whatever the net touched, a stunning shock on an object he could swing or cast. Windcraft recipe complete, crafted shock net effect stuns. Monsters and flyers on contact, a net that stuns. He immediately thought of He had killed those dangerous skywolves one by one using a snare and spear. It would have been so much easier with a high-tech shock net. A single quick shock could drop a lunging wolf. This tool would keep him alive. He could survive battles he had not even imagined yet. He secured his gear. He had a booster to escape the fort, a net to fight back, and a burner. This burner could process storm crystals, proving he could survive the deadly depths and return safely. But it cost him a water gourd and the skin off his palms. Worst of all, Riena's injured wing now sat folded and completely ruined against her back. She silently watched him work, refusing to speak about her agonizing pain. He promised himself that the moment they landed, he would fix her wing. He would fix her damaged wing, even if it took him the entire night to do. Lost in thought, he turned the crystal shards over in his bandaged hands. Suddenly, the system panel did something entirely new. No warning alerts this time. Instead, a brand new notification window slowly opened, glowing with a warm, deep light. It was completely unlike the flat, cold system notices he had grown used to. This screen pulsed faintly, mirroring the precise rhythm of the storm crystal itself. The words displayed were not about his balloon's status, they described the balloon. It was as though the vessel itself were waking up, arc seed stirring. This vessel is non-standard. A dormant frame has begun responding to survival. Salvage and crafting. Next evolution requires a stable structural frame. It wanted him to acquire and attach large frame materials. He read it twice. He read the words 3 times and arc seed. He had absolutely no clue. The system did not offer explanations, but he understood the core meaning of it. His torn balloon, the complete wreck he was handed while others got castles. It was actually a living seed, a hidden treasure waiting to grow into something grand. Now think about that, it grows as he survives, salvages, and fights. This legendary seed was quietly evolving under his hands this whole time. Now it had finally woken up and wanted to become something far greater. He realized how completely this changed his situation. One thought stopped him cold. Take that arrogant man in the stone castle who received the cannon blueprint. His fancy ship was completed on day 1. It would never improve or grow. Over time, it would only deteriorate and break down, just like finished things do. Our protagonist had started with the absolute worst vessel in the entire sky. But he understood now that it was the only one designed to grow. The system did not punish him with garbage, it handed him a seed. While others carried dead monuments, a living seed beats a monument every time. A monument can only fall, but a seed can climb higher and higher. He did not know how far it would climb, but he knew. He was no longer the unluckiest person in the Skyrift domain. Somehow everything had changed. The system now demanded a massive frame. He needed something far bigger than a simple wind vane or a guardrail. He required the massive bones of a true vessel, and there was only one place. He looked past the heavy clouds toward the ancient ruins floating in the sky. He started calculating where to find a massive frame to build upon. Something big enough to turn his balloon into a terror of the skies. Lo had a promise to keep first. They finally climbed out of the storm pocket. Into a calm band of the middle sky, safe air. As soon as the burner steadied, he turned his attention straight to Riena's broken wing. Desperate descent, shattered bone, yet she never stopped her warnings. The bone had shattered beneath her brace. Still, she kept shouting warnings. Safe at last, she went completely gray and still. The agonizing pain finally broke through. No more danger left to outrun. Lo did not ask, he simply told her he was setting it. She slowly let her wing ease into his hands, no fight left in her. This silent surrender was a level of trust he had paid a heavy price to earn. The fracture was ugly and worse than before, but the break itself was clean. A clean break, a patient man can fix this. He splinted it properly, securing the inner bone with thin, straight wood from the platform, binding them tight with rope fibers and layering soft beast hide for padding. He rebuilt the outer brace to reinforce the failed joint. Thick cloud sap locked the splint in place, leaving the joints free. Work was agonizingly slow, yet she bore the pain without making a single sound. She simply watched his hands when he finished and secured the brace. She tested the wing it held. She looked up. She asked him how he knew how to set bones like an expert. He explained he was used to fixing frames, tent poles, and broken umbrella spines. To him, a wing is just a frame that bleeds. The work is the same. You hold the broken piece in its natural shape until it remembers. He tied off the last tight binding and gave her a stern warning. Do not fly, not yet, let it forget. She can hold a rope and summon wind, but flying is off limits. He knows the heavy cost of that restriction and offers a quiet apology. She does not thank him, but her careful movements show she will obey. Folding her wing, she promises that once she heals, she won't just abandon him. That promise hangs in the air, making Lo realize things have shifted between them. He says nothing, keeping her words close like a warm stone in his pocket. There was no need to ruin a fragile connection by overthinking it. A small spark of warmth in a cold world, but reality quickly caught up. The mysterious arc seed required giant structural materials, the bones of a real ship. He had spent their entire ascent wrestling with where to find something that size. The most logical place to look was where all massive, broken debris fell. Fallen castles and shattered platforms clogged these dangerous aerial currents. These rich roots cut right through the high sky near Mule's fort. But heading back into that territory with a wounded companion was pure suicide. He needed a fallen frame far away from that monster's reach. To do that, he had to rely on the system to guide him. He dialed the salvage marker to its absolute maximum range and waited. Then just like that, the tracker flares. You can feel the tension immediately crank up. It was completely clear of the high sky and the dangerous fort. His pulse raced, a massive find. Target marked, a massive frame collapses, revealing structural materials. System warning, object too large for inventory, harvest in place. By now he knew exactly what those chilling words meant, pure danger. Anything too massive to pack away was too massive to grab and run. That meant he had to stay behind, working right on top of the target. He had to linger long enough for whatever guarded or hunted there to find him. This brutal sky world never handed out freebies, it only hung prizes inside collapsing ruins. It dared him to climb inside and grab them. He stopped expecting easy wins. Then he saw it. Riina pointed through the thick fog toward a bell tower. A massive stone and wood tower was tipped completely on its side. It drifted slowly through the mist, tumbling end over end in the weird gravity. At the very top, a massive bronze bell still clung to its wooden frame. It swung wildly, tolling a single, heavy, broken note with every slow rotation. The bell was absolutely gargantuan, far too heavy for him to ever hope of lifting. And the system confirmed it. He could not store it, nor could he carry it away. His only choice was to glide alongside, climb aboard, and hack off the pieces. He had to work fast before the whole structure disintegrated and dragged him down. That meant blind flying. Luckily, he had Riina on his side. Neither of them could pull this off alone. He could not steer and climb simultaneously. And with her broken wing, she certainly could not scale the falling tower. But she could still hold a safety rope with her one good hand and lean back. Bracing her body against the guardrail, she kept her grip tight. She held the steering line, keeping the balloon circling the tumbling wreckage. This kept them at a safe distance while he leapt onto the wet stone. From there, she could scan the foggy winds and shout warnings if things shifted. One bad gust could smash the tower into him or throw him into the void. She focused with a fierce intensity, desperate to prove she was still useful. She hated being grounded. Let's see if his crazy plan works. He armed himself with a dull knife, his bone spear, a climbing hook, and rope. With the line tied to his waist and anchored to the basket, he prepared. If he slipped off the stone, the rope would catch him before the abyss did. Riina held their position steady. He carefully timed the giant rolls of the tower. It was exactly like timing his jumps on those crazy falling platforms back then. As a flat section of the wooden frame finally swung level beneath him. He leaped, simple jump, but the next half second was pure terror. Hanging in empty space between the safety of the basket and the cold stone. He fell right alongside a building-sized ruin, with the freezing fog screaming past him. Above him, the shattered bronze bell kept tolling, deep, heavy. Every survival instinct screamed at him never to let go of his lifeline. But he let go. After all, the best rewards lay beyond fear. Everything truly worth finding in this wild sky existed right past that terrifying threshold. That split second where his hands must release safety to reach for the climb. He had fully made peace with that terror, even if his stomach never would. The stone felt freezing and slick, with mist under his bare fingers. The entire tower groaned, shifting under his weight like a living beast. He clung on. He grabbed the timber frame and got his bearings. It was far more disorienting than the platform. The massive tower rolled slow and complete, constantly shifting the gravity of his jump. What was once up became sideways and then down, forcing him to learn the rotation fast. One wrong move and he would be thrown off. Luckily, he found his footing quickly. He had spent hours learning how falling things move in this misty void. This rolling tower was just like the tumbling platforms he had already hooked. He timed his climb as the frame came. Under him, clinging tight when it flipped, working his way to the long, curved ribs along the spine of the tower. That sturdy frame was exactly what he wanted. Those curved ribs of seasoned timber ran the entire length beneath its stone skin. These were the very bones of the structure, the perfect material for the arc seed. It was far stronger and larger than any salvage he had gathered so far. The wood was incredibly old but still sound, built to last by master craftsmen. It had been seasoned by years of holding immense weight under extreme pressure. It was the finest wood he had ever seen. Bracing himself, he set his hook. He began to cut, but then a massive cloud serpent emerged from the bell. He should have wondered why a falling ruin's bell was still ringing so steadily. The answer became clear the moment he sliced into that first support beam. The vibration ran straight up the frame, waking the beast sleeping inside the bronze. It poured from the mouth of the bell, a long, pale, ridged cloud serpent. The creature was as thick as his torso, stretching endlessly into the thick mist. It had been coiled up in the dark, damp interior of the bell. Now it was awake, furious that someone was cutting its home to pieces. The beast rushed down the wooden frame, leaving him with absolutely nowhere to run. He was clinging to collapsing ruins, with only a rope around his waist. The balloon was too far, and Riina yelled a warning he already realized. His bone spear was perfect against wolves, but useless against a massive serpent charging down. Compared to this monster, it was a toothpick. He jabbed it forward to buy time. The serpent flinched from the sharp point, reacting like any beast protecting its eyes. That single split second was all the time he had to find another option. A second strike would only prove to the monster that he was no threat. Fighting this titan on its own ground was suicide. He had to think fast. He would use the only thing around heavier than the monster, the tower itself. This was the brutal survival lesson this harsh world kept forcing him to learn. When an enemy is far too strong to defeat, you do not use force. Instead, you weaponize the environment itself and bring their own situation down on them. He had absolutely nothing to fight a serpent, but he was in a falling tower. And a falling structure is just a collection of massive, deadly weights waiting to drop. Any survivor who knows exactly which weight to release does not need a weapon. He looked up. The giant iron bell clapper hung directly inside the bronze dome. This massive iron tongue swung violently back and forth with every roll of the structure. Meanwhile, the giant serpent reared up directly beneath the heavy mouth of the bell. Hissing with its jaws wide open, it was perfectly aligned with the drop zone. He instantly saw the trajectory. The heavy clapper was directly above the deadly beast. He would only get one single shot to make this cut count and survive. It was true, he sliced right through the clapper's pin, sending it dropping, with the next roll of the tower. The massive weight of that iron tongue swung completely free and plummeted straight through the open mouth of the bell, dropping right into the jaws of the giant serpent, reared up. Right beneath it, the heavy iron drove deep into the beast, forcing it down against the wooden frame and pinning it there, thrashing wildly. Its head was trapped under crushing weight it could not shake, no matter how much its massive body coiled and lashed. It was not dead, only trapped, but that was enough, because a trapped beast cannot stop him from working. And there was still so much to do before this whole tower shattered. He began cutting. Fast, far faster than was safe, while the serpent thrashed, pinned beneath that massive bell as Riina held the balloon close and screamed desperate warnings about the collapsing structure. Talk about intense pressure. Working fast without being careless is a rare skill. It was the absolute core of who he was, something he did better than anyone could ever expect. From a simple umbrella repairman, the secret is that you never actually rush the cut itself. Instead, you speed up everything else around it, the moving, the bracing, the making of choices. You let the blade work at its own pace, because a cut made in panic is a cut that must be done twice. Swiftly, he carved out the curved timber ribs, the long and sturdy bones of the tower, slicing them free of the crumbling stone and failing frame. He passed them across to the basket, using a swinging rope to send them over one by one. Soon, the swaying of the tower matched his steady work. Next, he grabbed the heavy bell chain, a thick stretch of linked iron strong, enough to hold almost anything, since the pinned serpent gave him a clean opportunity. And leaving resources behind was just a waste of weight. He sliced a section of its pale, ridged scales. Surprisingly, they were tough as steel armor, yet as light as cloth. In a protected alcove where the stone had blocked the storm, he discovered unbroken panes of old lantern glass along with a roll of dry storage cloth. It had somehow stayed dry. Right in the heart of the tower through this entire fall, both were priceless treasures. In a sky where almost everything was soaked or completely shattered, suddenly his inventory was updated with the curved tower ribs, bell chain, cloud serpent scales, old glass, and dry storage cloth. The ancient tower let out a final, agonizing groan just as he secured almost everything. The massive timber frame he had been cutting suddenly gave way, and the stone walls began peeling off into the fog. The entire structure was dissolving around him. He quickly chopped the final rib free, yelled out to Darina, and leaped off the collapsing tower on his anchor rope, swinging through the open air right back toward the basket. Behind him, the crumbling stone, the pinned serpent, and the massive ringing bell all shattered, plunging down together into the deep mist. Riina pulled hard on his line with her good hand, and he tumbled over the guardrail, collapsing onto the floor of the basket. He lay there gasping, cold, soaked, and shaking, but he had a basket loaded with the bones of a real vessel. Crafting the upgrades took the rest of that quiet journey. It was by far the most rewarding work he had done since waking up, because he was no longer just patching up a broken wreck to survive another night. He was actually building something built to last. Those curved tower ribs were fitted around the basket to make a proper frame, lashing and pinning them into a cradle of strong timber, which took the fragile flex out of the old wicker and gave him footing he could actually trust. It was a sturdy deck to stand, fight, and work on without support beams groaning beneath him. Then, a system alert chimed as the craft upgrade finished. The upgrade finishes, crafting a reinforced basket frame with vastly improved structural integrity. This provides stable footing, perfect for both tense combat and quick crafting. He combines the dry storage cloth, a cloud serpent scale, and the bell chain. This creates a second tool, solving a major problem he had faced since the beginning. His inventory only holds small items, forcing him to lash large salvage to the rim. That added heavy weight caught the wind and made a perfect target for enemy harpoons. Before this, there was simply nowhere to store the larger treasures he wanted to keep. He had already lost valuable timber because he could not store or hold onto it. Good planks were sacrificed to harpoons, left completely exposed on his vessel's outer rim. The new storage net fixes everything, woven from strong cloth and cloud serpent scale. Suspended from the bell chain, it finally gives him a secure place to stow gear. He can now pack away tools, salvage, and even those spare crystal shards safely. Everything is protected from the wind, balanced perfectly beneath the baskets of the weight road. The cargo now helps balance the ride, a vessel that can carry its own salvage. It's a vessel that no longer has to start every run from absolutely nothing. Honestly, this simple inventory fix is what finally turns a survivor into a true builder. The Windcraft system confirms the cloud storage net is complete, securing large item storage. This reduces drag, and he stands up in the basket once the crafting finishes. He feels the difference under his feet. The ridge does not groan as he shifts. The frame holds strong. The new storage net rides perfectly steady right beneath him. The canopy is fully sealed above, and the burner runs clean with a storm. Crystal booster ready for whenever he needs to climb. The torn balloon basket he woke up in is gone, replaced by a reinforced balloon, a real small vessel with solid bones, footing, and storage. It is the first stage of whatever the arc seed will grow into, finally letting himself feel something. It is a feeling he has avoided since the fall began, not safety. He will never feel safe up here, but he definitely feels capable. He built a survivor out of the bones of the fallen. Riina feels it too. In her own way, she walks the reinforced rim, testing it with her good wing. She does not say it is good, because she never praises anything, but she stops pointing out flaws when a creature who lives to find fault goes silent. It is the highest praise she can give, but she does say one thing. While watching him secure the storage net, and the words stick with him, she explains that her tribe built nothing, only nesting in whatever the sky offered. They never crafted a single structure capable of surviving a massive storm. This is exactly why the hunters could always prey on them so easily. Since bare wings and hands cannot defend against men armed with cannons and forts. Looking closely at the reinforced frame made from the bones of a dead tower. Now transformed into a living vessel, she wonders if the real difference between the prey and the predators has never been about wings or claws. Perhaps it simply comes down to who learns to build. He has no answer. He silently continues working, letting her process those incredibly heavy thoughts in peace. It was clearly something she had needed to say out loud for years. Suddenly, the control panel stirs with the deep, pulsing pain of the arc seed. Opening once again, he waits quietly for whatever instructions it will demand next. Not yet, it simply acknowledged his progress, the frame accepted, the seed grown. It reached another stage, settling deep into itself before stretching for more. He would learn what it needed next when it was ready. For now, it was enough. It was no longer just stirring, it was finally starting to wake up. Suddenly, Riina froze at the rail, her posture signaling immediate trouble as she stared up. The massive enemy fort had found them, descending rapidly out of the higher skies. It headed straight toward the shattered bell tower, drawn to the fresh wreck. Drawn by the wreck, Muyo was hunting the exact same drift paths he usually patrolled. For a second, he hoped it was just chance, that the enemy was only after the ruins, letting them escape. But just as they prepared to vanish into the fog, a bright warning flashed on his screen. This was no accident. He had brought this doom on himself the moment he stole the crystal. The system's warning flashed, hostile vessel tracking storm crystal signature. The storm crystal, the prize he nearly died for, was giving him away. The raw power pushing his booster and keeping him out of reach had a catch. It hummed with a distinct resonance, a literal scent that the fort could easily track. He had been broadcasting his location across the open sky since installing it. Muyo did not even need eyes to find him. He could smell the crystal's power. Just like skywolves catching the scent of blood, Muyo steered his fort straight toward them. He was descending through the heavy mist to seize their newly upgraded balloon. Their vessel was finally worth stealing, but that lift booster was a hungry beast. It was chained to his burner like a starving animal, ready to eat him alive. He had built it to outrun Muyo, and it worked, but at a terrible price. Every single escape attempt drank precious fuel at a rate that made his stomach turn. Now that the fort could track the crystal, running was no longer a viable option. He simply could not afford to keep burning through resources to flee. Every high-altitude climb cost fuel that he desperately needed to replace. Finding fuel meant scavenging, scavenging meant exposure, and exposure meant Muyo following the scent. It was a vicious cycle. He had built a perfect trap for himself. He had built his own cage. Honestly, how does he plan to get out of this one? The solution was to stop hoarding fuel between crises and start actively hunting it. He needed a real upgrade, not this patched-up, crystal-boosted burner. The current setup was barely holding together. He required a genuine power core. Something capable of regulating the crystal's intense output instead of just wasting it. But constructing that core required a highly rare material, air crystal. Not the dangerous storm crystal, but its much calmer, stable cousin. A pale gem that provided natural buoyancy, the same way storm crystals held lightning. It was the very item the system had teased in his recipe blueprints. He had stared at the grayed-out recipe, wishing his engine ran more efficiently. The blueprint was locked, tantalizingly out of reach, until he found the missing element. But in this game, a locked blueprint was basically a map, pointing to his next destination. The system never handed out direct answers. It simply showed him the door and left him to find the key. To stop his burner from constantly starving, he absolutely needed that air crystal. And those precious crystals only grew in one specific place. Luckily, Riina knew the way. She had remained silent since the bell tower, pacing along the ship's outer rim. She spent her hours walking the reinforced rim with her quiet thoughts. Riina stood with her grounded wing, watching the sky in a way he now understood. It was not idleness, but a constant reading, when he told her his needs. Silence, then she mentioned the cliffs. There were places in the middle sky, she said, where clouds thickened and hardened into floating stone. Massive pale cliffs hung in the air. Never falling, deadly beasts nested there. Air crystal grew inside. It ran through the stone like rich ore. And its lifting power kept the cliffs afloat, the birds nesting right there. Were absolute monsters, a massive colony. A single giant nest queen, and they hated anyone coming for their crystal. She told him her tribe had circled those cliffs for generations. yet never took it. Pure bitterness returned. As she explained, they simply could not. Winged creatures cannot hover in dead air. To mine the seams, landing directly on the cliff face would instantly wake the colony. So they flew past the richest stone, watching it glow for lifetimes, unable to touch it. The wealthy castle folk above mined it with tethered platforms and grew fat. It was. She muttered her most hated lesson. The sky did not give its best treasures to those who loved it most. It gave them to those prepared to take, not a fight. A theft you survive, you cannot kill the colony, you must go under. The nests where the queen never looks, cut whatever crystal you can and get away before she wakes. If she wakes while you are on that cliff, you do not come back. Did he understand the difference? Explained he was once a repairman in a city full of poor people. So he understood theft and survival. Rihanna looked at him with amusement. Told him to find that cliff, guided by her directions and his own enhanced eyes. The pale shape slowly emerged from the gray mist, a giant cloudstone. Cliff floating impossibly, dark nests pocked the face. And laced with the soft, inviting glow of air crystal, huge birds wheeled around. Giant pale things, half folded into a house-sized nest. He saw the sleeping queen, vast and completely still and sleeping. Instantly, he understood why Rihanna spoke of theft, not battle. This was no battle, only theft. He prayed she would stay asleep as he studied the cliff like a master craftsman. Don't rush. Rushing means paying. Just like everything else up there, this giant cliff had a specific grain. Dual wind streams met underneath. This patch of completely still air was where the glowing crystal seemed thickest, where the queen rarely looked. But guess what? His balloon could. A balloon tethered to the stone could hang safely all day long. This was exactly why the system marked it as reachable, and precisely why Rihanna's tribal warriors had never been able to take it. Because winged creatures cannot hover in dead air. These creatures were all her tribe had ever faced. The cliff was built to defeat wings. It was never meant to stop a man in a tethered basket with a chain and a knife, and he felt that quiet satisfaction of finding a problem his strange skills could solve. His plan was simple, the only kind that ever survives a sky crawling with monsters. He would steer the balloon low, slipping right under the cliff edge beneath the nests, where the queen never looked, right where the crystal veins seemed thickest. Inside the stone, he would anchor the balloon to the cliff using the bell chain to keep it steady. Then he would crawl onto the underside, hanging from the chain, slice away any air crystal he could reach with his dull hooked knife, and climb back inside to escape before anything dangerous realized he was even there. Rihanna's job was to grip the steering rope and watch the upper ridge. For the queen, if she moved, they ran, crystal or not. 2 Ironbeak sentries spotted him first. They were patrolling the lower cliff, guarding the exact blind spot where he thought he would be safe. Suddenly, they dived straight toward him as he maneuvered the balloon closer. Screeching, they dived together. If not for his shock net, he would have had to use his spear, and that noise would wake the entire cliff. But with this weapon, he did not need to fight at all. He threw the net directly at the first diving beast, the thundermoth dust. Crackling along the ropes, it wrapped around the creature with a sharp shock that instantly paralyzed its wings, sending it falling silently into the void, without making a single sound loud enough to reach the nests. The second guard hesitated, seeing its partner fall, a hesitant beast. It is easy to predict. He timed its next move and threw the net once more, dropping the second monster just as easily. That was the magic of his invention. And that clever trick changed everything. Just think, a day ago, 2 guards would have triggered a brutal struggle, and a fight here meant facing the queen and certain death. Instead, it was just a quiet double drop. His creations were slowly buying him the kind of silence he could never afford before. Up here, silence was far more valuable than any weapon. 2 sentries down, completely silent and clean. The theft remained a secret. He quickly tethered the balloon, looping it tight around a solid ridge of stone, and climbed down. He moved hand over hand under the cliff, dangling over the massive drop. With a spear on his back and tools on his belt, he was ready. Below the basket, the empty storage net waited to be filled. Bright veins of crystal glowed softly through the dark stone. He began carving into the rock like a miner, wedging his hook and knife deep of the stone, prying out the glowing, levitating crystal chunk by chunk, which felt incredibly strange, since the light crystal wanted to float straight up. It was delicate, dangerous work, dangling upside down in the empty sky. with nothing but a gray abyss below him and a sleeping queen above. But the crystal refused to break free easily, rooted deep inside the stone. Like a stubborn vine, he had to hunt for natural cracks to pry them out. He faced a wall, needing to find the natural fracture lines and work along them. Prying instead of hacking, since any hard blow would ring through the cloudstone. Like a struck bell, the last thing he wanted was to wake whatever slept inside the cliff. He worked the tight seams the same way he had worked 1,000 stubborn spots before. Patient where patience served, and fast where the fracture gave way. He filled the storage net, keeping his movements incredibly careful, quiet, and fast. The mesh grew heavy with glowing chunks that tugged upward as if eager to escape. He had nearly gathered enough when suddenly the whole cliff began to shudder. The queen woke screaming, and it was not his fault. Mule had followed him. He tracked the resonance, found him on the cliff, but was positioned too far away. He could not land a clean harpoon shot through the stone, so he did something worse. Something much smarter and crueler. He fired a massive harpoon directly into the upper cliff. Firing straight into the nest colony itself, not to hit him, but to trigger pure chaos. He wanted to wake the queen, turning the entire colony against him to do his dirty work. Letting nature handle what his cannons could not reach, it was the move of a smart survivor. A man who had been hurt and learned. The wolves in the wind had taught him well. He understood now that he did not even need to hit the balloon directly. He only needed to turn the sky itself hostile and let nature do the rest. Since cannons failed, he let nature take over. The harpoon struck right near the queen's nest. Instantly, the cliff erupted. Swarms of furious birds boiled out from every single nest. The massive queen uncoiled and rose from her nest, shrieking so loudly the stone trembled. He felt the vibration deep in the cloudstone while hanging from a single chain. Stranded under her cliff, holding a heavy net filled with her precious glowing crystal. By every rule Riina had taught him, he was already dead. Suddenly, her voice echoed. He heard his name, but her pitch carried something worse than a wind warning. It was pure fear. He knew she could see the unfolding disaster from her angle. Up by the balloon, she watched the entire swarm turn, fully expecting him to die. But he did not feel dead yet, and honestly, his mind was already moving. That cold, hyper-focused clarity that always takes over when everything goes to hell. It was the exact focus that had kept him alive his entire life. In that moment, he locked onto the harpoon, the queen, and the connecting line. Mule's harpoon remained lodged near her nest, its long cable trailing across the sky. The wire stretched all the way back to the fort as she rose furiously. Charging straight toward the threat, ascending rapidly right past the heavy steel cable. Having spent his entire life in these skies, he knew one absolute truth. When an enemy is far too strong to fight, you redirect their own momentum. He could not defeat the queen directly, but he had a plan. Armed with only a hook and chain, he waited patiently for the perfect window of opportunity. She was flying directly toward the cable connected to the fort of her attacker. He immediately severed his safety tether, sliding down to the absolute end of the chain. Using his weight, he flicked the loose harpoon cable directly into her path. A tiny nudge of metal on metal was all it took in this chaos. Blinded by pure rage, the climbing beast was not paying attention to her claws. Her massive leg caught on the wire, instantly tangling it around her scales. Her incredible upward power yanked the line tight, snapping her focus completely. She glared down at the sudden trap, redirecting all her terrifying fury. The cable ran taut and hummed with tension, stretching all the way back to Mule's fort. She did not know what the line was. She only knew that something had snagged her leg and that this obstacle was anchored to a fort crawling with the men who had attacked. Her nest, she turned her massive, blind rage away from the cliff, away from him. And toward the fortress at the other end of the cable, she charged it. Screaming, he would think back later on just how razor-thin the margin was, how the entire plan hinged on a few split seconds, a heavy chain, and Mule's own cable. And how little came down to muscle, and how much relied on sheer perception. That is the only kind of victory a survivor like him ever gets. He can never outmuscle a nest. Queen outfly a white wing or outgun a fort, but he can see the line running. From the harpoon straight to the queen's leg, and he can see it in the single second he has. To act, he can whip a length of chain exactly where his eyes tell him. To that, as it turns out, is enough to survive in a sky ruled by things stronger than him. Over time, raw strength always loses to a man who truly sees. He was starting to believe that, much like how he once believed a torn awning could always be saved if you just found the right line of stitches. He cut the crystal cluster. Luz swung back along the slack chain to the basket and ordered Riina to fly. And they plummeted away from the cliffside and deep into the gray fog, behind them the nest. Queen descended on Muel's fort like a nightmare of wings and claws. He did not watch the fortress burn. He did not need to. He had the crystal and the queen had a target that was not him. Muel had learned. He just hoped throwing a stone. A hornet's nest only works if you're not standing right next to it. Inventory. Updated air crystals, gull eggs, hard feathers, a queen feather fragment and nest. Resin, he built the burner core in the calm that followed, his finest creation since waking. The air crystal, seated in a housing of cloud serpent. Scale and bound with nest resin, gave the burner a true heart, a core that held. The crystals lift and metered it out steadily, instead of letting the booster gulp it down all at once. This project took him longer than any prior build, because this was not a simple patch, but a real piece of engineering with actual parts that had to fit, breathe, and hold heat without cracking. He worked on it the way he once handled rare, high-paying jobs that actually mattered. He worked slow and exacting, testing each connection before sealing it. The serpent scale took the intense heat that metal could not. The nest resin cured rock hard, keeping the crystal seated during the burn. When he finally lit it, the lift came up smooth, steady and quiet, holding securely without the hungry roar of the bare booster. He knew he had crossed a threshold. He was no longer patching together a wreck. He was building a real vessel, part by deliberate part, and the difference was the difference between surviving and truly living. Windcraft recipe. Complete, crafted, stable burner core. Effect, fuel efficiency greatly improved, sustained, stable lift, and booster cost reduced. The gull eggs were food. Real food, finally, no more rationing every single bite. He cooked one over the burner in a cracked cooking tin, sharing it with Riina. The hard feathers and remaining nest resin went into the storage net for his future projects. The queen feather fragment was kept completely separate because the system had marked it as extremely rare, and rare things always matter. Later, it was just a small thing, sharing a cooked egg inside a basket in the cold gray mist. It was the closest thing to a normal moment Doha had known since the world fell, and he felt the strange weight of it, two broken souls cast aside by the safe sky. One human and one branded a monster by a cold, heartless system. They ate a stolen egg from a cracked tin while a nest queen shattered the hunter's fortress. Riina ate slowly. Watching him, Doha did not push her to talk. For once, the quiet between them felt comfortable. For the first time since he woke up falling from the sky, his food and balloon were stable enough that he could finally stop measuring survival in minutes. He could think in hours now, in days even. He had not planned past the next breath since waking up in that torn basket. It changes a man, that sudden shift when survival is no longer measured in frantic heartbeats, but becomes a path you can actually plan around. Honestly, who could blame him? Doha felt himself starting to want things beyond just the next breath, to fix Riina's broken wing for good, to find out, though he kept it secret, what the Ark Seed was meant to become. Could a man, given the worst ship in the sky, end up flying the absolute best? He was thinking exactly that, watching Riina eat her portion of the egg with the weary care of a starved soul. Then she set the shell down and shared the secret she had carried since the bell tower, the truth she had harbored ever since they fled. She confessed her tribe's nest lay along the upper storm edge, avoiding his eyes. She stared out at the gray fog, not a cliff like this, but a real nest, her birthplace. The place where those hunters came from. She admitted she had been flying away from it because she could not reach it, terrified of what she would find. But now Doha had a vessel capable of reaching it, and a burner powerful enough to withstand the fierce storm edge. She could no longer pretend she did not know exactly where her own people were. She finally looked at him, her gaze soft but carrying an ancient, heavy pain. The hunters were there, she warned. They harvest her tribe's feathers the same way Mule harvests broken sky vessels. They harvested their wings. All this time she had eaten his stolen food, helping steer his ship and calling it survival, while her people were systematically mutilated. One feather at a time along the storm edge. She was done lying to herself. Doha did not answer immediately. Any easy, comforting promise would have been a lie, and she would have seen right through it. The easy lie was promising they would go, that he would fly his half-mended ship straight into a deadly storm to save strangers. The actual truth was much harder, and he gave it to her straight because she deserved honesty. He told her bluntly that he did not want more passengers crowded onto his balloon. His vessel was upgraded, but still not strong enough for a suicidal rescue mission. He reminded her that the storm edge was a graveyard where ships went to die. Everything he had built was meant to keep just the two of them alive, barely. But then Doha said the only part that actually mattered. None of those facts changed. What they were going to do, he had spent his entire life repairing discarded things. He was not about to draw the line now just because a heartless system labeled her people monsters. Her tribe was being stripped of their pride, feather by feather. And Doha fixed broken things. It was simply what he had to do. Doha explains it plainly, a simple decision. Riina just stares. She looks at him, her prepared arguments completely dissolving in the quiet moment. All her prepared defenses crumble in an instant. Set a course for the storm edge, she commands. She promises to guide him to a secret sanctuary she never wanted a human to see. But then she hesitates. If things are as bad as she fears, Doha must act. He must step in and stop her before she gets them both killed in her panic. She needs him to be her eyes when grief blinds her. That is his purpose. The storm edge warns them of its presence long before they actually arrive. The sky deepens into a heavy, suffocating gray as their vessel continues to plunge further down. It is highly charged, just like the crystal pocket, but their new core proves its immense worth 100 times over, keeping their lift completely steady. A standard booster would have starved completely in these conditions, but the storm layer waits below. Like a dark cliff, a massive, crushing presence waits beneath the heavy clouds. This deep blue abyss is the exact place Riina once called death itself. And yet they are intentionally flying right along the dangerous rim of this massive nightmare. Every survival instinct Doha learned over the past week screams at him to run. It is the exact opposite direction of safety, down toward the terror they avoided before. Capable of fighting the heavy gale, a sturdy vessel, and one powerful reason. And he has learned that a true purpose can turn any wrong direction into the only path. Riina grows incredibly quiet as they draw closer, but this is different. It is not the focus of a pilot reading the wind, it is heavier. She is marching straight toward a looming terror she has desperately avoided for a very long time. Doha keeps his distance, giving her the space she needs to find her strength. Finally, she points her healthy wing toward a dark silhouette near the storm edge. Over there, she whispers. Her voice is incredibly level, but only because she forces it. Doha had spent the entire journey worrying about finding too many survivors. It was a small and shameful fear, but he had honestly confessed the truth to her. He explained in raw, honest words that his tiny vessel could barely keep the two of them alive. Overloading it with rescued strangers would only cause them to plummet. He braced himself for a horrific choice, but the storm edge is about to change everything. Prepare yourselves, because the reality of this place is about to erase his fear in the cruelest way. When they approach the nest, they find absolutely no one left to rescue. The magnificent sky nest of Riina's tribe now lies completely shattered in the air. It was once a massive home of branches and protective resin, built against a floating cloudstone spur, where the harsh winds broke, leaving a rare pocket of calm air. Generations had lived here, their ancient history woven into the very structure. It was crafted with deep care by countless loving hands and wings over many generations. But now it is violently ripped open. Half the sanctuary hangs in tatters. Entire sections are missing, dragged away by some massive destructive force. The once peaceful safe haven is now completely choked with the leftover weapons of war. Cruel hunter hooks, that is the very first thing Doha spots clearly. Heavy iron hooks are sunk deep into the weave on trailing cables. The exact same barbed iron used on human warships was deployed here to brutally tear. Their home apart, crushed, pale eggshells lie scattered across the entire ruin. They are hollow and empty, and Doha forces himself not to think about them. Ugly, clever feather traps were everywhere, snares rigged directly through the gaps in the weave where fleeing birds would soar, lined with wicked hooks. They would catch a wing and hold it tight until the hunter arrived. Several traps had snapped shut, still holding grim proof of their victims. Riina let out a shattered sound right then, one her companion would never forget. She did not cry, she likely cried herself dry long before he saved her from that falling net. What remained inside was far past weeping. She went pale and completely still, calmly demanding that they take her down inside. Trying to find survivors, they searched the hollow nest like a ruined shipwreck. They called cautiously, but only the wind answered. The torn weave creaked, slowly revealing the grim horror of what had occurred. That quiet search was the absolute worst part. far harder than any physical battle. Every empty gap in the woven structure felt like a tiny, blessed mercy from above. While every occupied trap was pure torment, still Riina. Determined to see it all, she demanded both the miracles and the horrors because she refused to be the kind of survivor who hides from the suffering of her people. Her companion followed her closely through every shattered corridor, shielding her where he could. He silently stepped in front, blocking the worst sights. Before she reached them, and her quiet compliance showed just how much she suffered. But the entire tribe was not lost. Riina began decoding the subtle clues. The way a master reads a torn seam, whispering details in flat, short sentences. As they walked, every word cost her dearly. She pointed out where some had been brutally dragged away by the hooks, yet so many others had successfully escaped, she explained, gesturing toward the escape patterns left in the ruins. There were far fewer feathers and shells left behind than a massacre required. Clearly, the whole tribe had not perished. She pointed out the distinct tier directions showing how a fleeing flock leaves a completely different aerial trail. Then captured birds, these tiny details proved they had fled instead of dying. Her companion understood. She was desperately trying to convince herself of this hope. She carefully constructed this hope out of ruins, much like he built vessels from wreckage. The tribe had scattered into the raging storm edge, a place where the heavy hunter skiffs could never easily follow them into the dark. It was their classic survival tactic, diving into the worst turbulent winds and trusting their own wings. They were still out there, scattered and wingless, but definitely alive. It was the only tiny shred of mercy this hollow nest could offer, and she embraced it. She told him she had to keep things simple now, desperately reminding herself of the very survival rules he had taught her to keep them grounded. They could not chase her people directly into the raging storm. They would only perish out there. Instead, they would gather whatever salvage could help track them down later, and then escape. That was the plan, and they executed it, though salvaging was incredibly painful. Taking materials from a destroyed home, while Riina struggled to maintain her composure. Using his exact teachings was brutal, yet it was the necessary path forward. The heavy work kept her hands busy, keeping her mind away from grief. Together, they collected strong feather fiber, spun directly from the abandoned nests. This was a rare, precious craft material he had never managed to salvage before. The material he touches is finer than anything resting in his own storage net. Riina shows him how to harvest it safely, pointing out the strands spun for strength, and which for warmth. The knowledge of generations now passes to a human in a ruined nest because there is no one left of her own kind to receive it. They scrape Skynest resin from the old joints of the weave, stronger and lighter than the raw cloud sap he had been living on. Her tribe rendered this resin from storm edge plants using a method she describes in broken pieces as they work, half teaching and half remembering aloud. They carry out bolts of warm nest cloth woven thick to shield them against the storm edge chill. He immediately remembers his lost jacket and the biting cold that has settled in his bones since his first day. Riina, watching him touch the material, tells him flatly to keep a bolt and stop flying half frozen. Like a fool, it is the closest thing to warmth she has shown him yet. And he accepts it in that exact spirit. But then, Riina uncovers a bone charm. It lies buried deep inside the ancient weave, far out of the hunter's reach. A small flat piece of carved bone hangs from a simple cord. As she lifts it, her hands shake for the very first time. She whispers that it is a route map. Etched by her vanished tribe, the secret wind currents of the storm edge are cut deep into bone so that their vital knowledge outlives the people who carried it. In their minds, this relic is ancient, a master charm once kept at the very heart of the nest. The hunters would have prized this over any rare feather if they had ever found it, because these etched lines map the escape paths for a scattered people, guiding them along safe routes through the storm edge only her tribe understood. She curls her fingers tightly around it, tucking it away in silence against her skin. He understands that he has just watched her reclaim the single most important relic of her shattered world, and she is far from broken. Before they prepare to leave, he decides on one last task. It feels right to do it here in the ruins. Using the fine materials her own family crafted, her broken wing has been healing all this time under the scrap metal brace he constructed. He can see in her subtle movements that the bone has knit enough to hold weight and glide, if not fully fly. The clumsy old brace holds her wing completely rigid, locked down to protect a break that is already healing, but a locked wing cannot glide, so he decides To rebuild it, he gathers the delicate feather fiber and the light skynest resin, the finest materials her tribe ever made, and crafts a brand new support system for her. It is not a cage to lock her wing down, but a flexible support, flexing where needed and reinforcing only the joint that still requires protection. It is light enough that she will barely register the weight in the air. He works as he always does, slow, meticulous, talking her through every single adjustment before making it. When he fits the new device and she unfurls her wing, feeling the brace give and support her weight, she suddenly goes completely silent. She murmurs that this is her tribe's own fiber, marveling that he made her a brace out of her home. It is the best material in the heavens, he replies, and it felt wrong using anything else. He ties off the last knot. She can glide now, short glides, banks and strikes, though not true flight just yet. Her bone still needs more time to mend before taking her full weight in the open air, but she no longer has to sit on the edge calling the wind. She can finally be in it. He looks at her, explaining he also crafted a tether. He told her she could do it without falling, that she was done being grounded. She did not answer him, but something in the set of her shoulders shifted. The heavy weight a grounded flyer carries finally eased. He went back to gathering salvage, letting her have the moment to herself. Then the storm gulls came. An abandoned nest smelled like easy opportunity to everything in the sky. These were not the usual colony gulls or ironbeaks. Storm gulls were edge dwellers, dark, ragged, bold scavengers living off what the storm killed and what hunters left behind. The ruined nest with its scattered shells and smell of death drew them down in a loose, hungry flock. They came to pick the bones of Riena's home. She could not stomach that. He saw it in her before she even moved, her grief turning hard and hot. He made a split-second decision. A grieving woman flying into a flock, alone on a wing that was only half-healed, was a woman about to die in the ruins of her own nest, and he would not allow it. He anchored her. He had the rope and her trust, moving before she could leap off the rim. He looped a line around her, fast and secure, anchored to the frame. It was long enough for her to move, but short enough to stop her fall. He told her hard and clear that she was not allowed to die here. If she was going to fight, she was going to fight on his line. She rounded on him. For a second, that old killer fury flashed in her eyes. The same rage that went for his throat when they first met. Then it broke. What replaced it was a fierce, grateful understanding. She knew. She had asked him herself to see the line she could not see on her own. Here was the line, a rope around her waist to fight without dying. She fought beside him properly then for the very first time. Her wing was not healed enough to fly, but it was healed enough to glide. Anchored to the frame, she threw herself off the rim in short, brutal glides, banking on her good wing and her braced one. Together, striking with her claws at the storm gulls defiling her nest, caught short on his rope before the glide turned to a fatal fall. He had never seen her in the air before. Grounded she was. Sharp, proud, and contained. In the air, even on a half-mended wing. She was something else entirely, fast, precise, and absolutely terrible. A creature finally doing the thing it was born to do. He understood. Watching her, why her people called the open sky home, and why losing it to a hook was the cruelest thing hunters could ever do. He fought from the basket beside her, bone spear and shocknet working the gulls. The two of them together cleared the flock off the ruin in a hard, bright fury. Her glides remained within his reach, her claws paired with his shocknet. The partnership they built without naming it worked at its full pitch. That rope was everything. Twice her glide ran too long and her wing faltered. The bad bone refused the last bank. Twice she dropped like a stone. Twice the line snapped taut, bringing her up from the deadly storm layer. He hauled her back to the rim hand over hand while she caught her breath and threw herself out once more. She let him guide her. A bird never willingly lets itself be dragged out of the sky. Never. It goes against their entire nature to be reined in like a hooked fish. But Riina actually trusted him, letting him hold the other end of that rope. She did not fight to recover the glide herself, risking death for pride. It was the deepest proof of trust she had ever given him, ever. She would rather die than be held, yet here she was. Letting herself be held so she could fight and live. They made it work. When the attacking gulls finally broke and fled, they let them go. Riina hung there, on the line with her chest heaving and her claws bloody in her ruined home. Everything was quiet around them. She did not say a word for a while. Then she climbed back in, letting him unloop the line while she stared. Staring at the bone charm in her hand, she spoke her choice. I am staying. I am staying with you, she said, not because I cannot fly. It will heal. We both know I will fly again, but my people are scattered and hunted. A single warrior with a half-mended wing cannot save them on her own, but a vessel that can dive the storm edge, a man who fixes broken things, and a woman who knows the hidden routes might succeed, and the sky fort. That did this still flies, and those hunters still fly, and I want them. To fall, you are the one who taught me that wanting a thing to fall is not the same as being able to make it fall. You make things, I want to make their fall. She held his eyes. That is why I stay, to be clear. That it is a choice and not a debt. He assured her he never saw it as a debt. He began gathering the loot into the storage net. Meanwhile, the system had been completely quiet through all of this, as if keeping its digital tongue. Then the system chimed twice. New rewards were earned. Inventory updated. Feather fiber, sky nest resin, bone root charm, and storm gold cores. Windcraft recipe complete. Crafted feather rope tether effect, enabling anchored glide. Combat for a winged ally. It prevents falls during partial flight. This feather rope tether effect prevents falls during partial flight. And this feather rope tether was crafted from the fiber he collected. In fact, it prevents any dangerous falls during partial flight. He built it using the feather fiber, the rope, and the storm gold cores. This was the very thing he had just improvised during the heat of battle. A proper rig running from the frame to harness, strong and light. It was quick to clip so Riina could throw herself into glide combat. She could safely dive off the rim without risking a fall she could not survive. That was the first thing he had ever built for someone else's active use. And seeing her clip into it, testing its strong, secure hold. Seeing her realize he had built her a real way to fight without dying. It did something to her face. Honestly, we cannot blame him for keeping that quiet. Windcraft recipe complete. Glider side sail recipe unlocked. Effect requires assembly, true directional flight, dive, bank, and climb. This second recipe was the one that truly made his breath catch. The gathered feather fiber, the worm nest cloth, and the serpent scale finally added up to the exact thing he wanted since learning his craft. Before, the balloon could only drift. A side sail was needed, not just a steering vane. He wanted real wings, a true sail to guide the balloon. Something to let him dive, bank, and climb, just like Riina's people did. Flying in a way no balloon was ever meant to fly, the recipe was finally unlocked. The blueprint was unlocked, allowing him to build it immediately with the salvage from his storage net. The moment he assembled this, his torn balloon would change forever. He would stop just trying to survive and finally conquer the sky. That evening, Riina sat quietly, turning the ancient bone root charm under the dim light of the cabin. When she finally spoke, she held it out so he could see the carvings. The hidden roots of the storm edge were carved cleanly into the old bone. There is something on it I did not expect to find, she says, pointing. Her finger traces a path past the storm edge, deeper than her people ever go. It leads into carvings he cannot read, a secret route her tribe kept. It leads straight into the dark storm itself, down a highly specific path. It only opens after a heavy lightning storm, when the deep winds finally die down. She looks up at him, and all the grief has completely vanished from her face. Only sharp focus remains, a focus he has learned to trust completely. She explains the old carvers marked it because of what drifts up after storms. She talks of rare wood, doha, arkwood, and the wreckage of ancient vessels. He could never find it in falling ruins because it simply does not fall. It rises from the deep for a very brief moment, only along the single path, right after the lightning. Riina taps the carving, if he truly intends to grow this vessel into something strong enough to make the fort fall. The next piece is down there. But get this, nobody has ever gone down that path and returned in her grandmother's lifetime.